even the chief up the wall sometimes, but if the situation was serious enough, Cliff could put a cork in it. It was impressive that he could stop at all, knowing how much the boy could talk. But that's not ample reason enough to kill him. A series of thoughts flooded Eric's mind so much he struggled to grasp for one to focus on. What if Brandine told Adriana to stop talking to everyone? Was he that much of a control freak? Was she even safe with him anymore? The poison in the cup wasn't enough to kill Cliff, or he would have died. What if it was just enough to make a point? What if? A cry of laughter interrupted Eric's montage of thought processes. Luckily, he knew that laugh anywhere and ducked behind some thicker trees before the couple ran by from a few yards away. He rolled his eyes at Brandine's flirty comment to the girl. He wanted to puke, assuming it was Adriana. However, when he mentally prepared himself to look around the tree and see Adriana with another guy, he didn't expect to see Dana in her place. Eric stared in open shock as Dana replied to something Brandine said, slapped his chest, and then roughly grabbed him by the shirt and kissed him. Brandine instantly backed her into the nearest tree and began kissing her hard and fast. Things started heating up so quickly, Eric whipped around and stared at the other trees with wide eyes. He was pretty sure his face was flushed. To an extent, it didn't matter who was making out, he certainly didn't want to watch. But this. He was going to kill him. He wanted nothing more than to run over and knock the guy to high heaven for this. That Brandine would dare freak out about his and Adriana's kiss and force her to stop talking to him for cheating, and he'd been cheating on Adriana this whole time. The way they were kissing, it was obvious this wasn't their first tryst. Eric crept out of his hiding place as quietly as possible and went back to the village the way he came. How he managed to hide from them and not look back at the same time, he didn't know. He suspected they were too wrapped up in each other to think anyone would be out here. Finally, he stomped back into the village, thoughts a-whirl. He wanted to find Hiccup, but knew the chief was busy all afternoon. And now with Cliff sick at the heelers and a fiend on the loose, Hiccup's plate was probably even more filled. But he could tell Adriana. Eric turned tail and ran to the Haddock's house, not stopping once. He nearly bowled over a few people in the process, which he shouted apologies over his shoulder in his haste. His stump began to hurt by the time he reached the Haddocks. He walked the last several yards until he reached the door. He wiped the sweat off his face and checked his hair, wondering how he was actually going to say this. In his haste, he'd forgotten that she'd been dating him for the last almost 2 years. That's a long time to give your heart to someone. She'd already been hurt by so many people in her life. She didn't deserve this. But he couldn't hide the truth from her. He had to protect her. Eric raised a fist and knocked on the door. He heard shuffling coming from the inside and his stomach twisted into knots. The door swung open to reveal Astrid. "Hi Eric," the matriarch smiled and swung the door open. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, Eric brushed his hair back again. "I need to talk to Anna." Astrid twisted her lips as she thought. "She's not here, I think she's out for the rest of the day. At least until dinner." "Oh," Eric remarked flatly. "Everything okay?" Astrid asked as she marched over to the kitchen table, where a large assortment of weapons had been laid out. Eric looked over the collection with a mixture of interest and trepidation. "Not really." Eric sighed, wondering if he should tell her. She'd be the next person to tell after Adriana and Hiccup, after all. "What's going on?" Astrid asked. "Well." A loud squawk interrupted him as Sharpshot zipped into the room through a hole in the ceiling. He landed on Astrid's shoulder and stuck out his foot. Astrid accepted the note and sighed at its contents. "Sorry Eric, I have to run to the academy." Astrid frowned, scooping up her favorite axe and strapping it to her back. "Do you want to come with me and tell me what's going on?" An emergency at the academy was never a good thing. He knew she'd be too distracted by him or the other circumstance to be able to focus on both. He battled with himself on which was more important, obviously Adriana, but she couldn't shirk her duties as the chief's wife, especially if Hiccup himself sent his personal terror to call. "No, you go ahead." Eric waved an arm. "I'll catch you later." "Are you sure?" "Yep. It's fine." Eric followed her out to the porch and watched as she jumped into Stormfly's saddle. All right, I'll talk to you later then. Astrid smiled, then directed her dragon to take off. Eric sighed as he watched her leave, wishing for once that his best friend's parents weren't the leaders of the tribe. A common favorite Burkean meal consisted of roasted chicken, potatoes and gravy, hot rolls, warm cider, and Grandma Ingerman's homemade brownies. With every tasty treat and delicacy accounted for, everyone was happy and content to sit around the table with friends or family, partake in good food and happy discussion. All except one. Eric picked at his food with an angry scowl. Originally he'd chosen to sit at a table alone to stew in his anger, but soon his table had filled with random teenagers without his consent. Obviously the table wasn't really his, so they didn't need to ask his permission to sit there. But still, just about everyone knew that when Eric Larson sat alone, it was more than likely on purpose. The teenagers cracked up about something Thorin said, especially the girls. Eric resisted the urge to fling a gob of mashed potatoes at him. Literally everything anybody said right now drove him up the wall. There were serious issues going on right now and all they had time for was jokes and games. Granted, none of them knew about the problems with Brandine and Adriana, but they knew about Cliff. Finn joining in the fun and games wasn't helping his mood. They still hadn't received word yet if Cliff was okay. If Mara didn't send him a message soon, he was going to barge in there himself and demand answers. He glared through his bangs at the couple sitting across the room. Brandine had himself all up in Adriana's business as if her discomfort made no difference to him. It didn't help that the only other people at the table were Donna, Kale, Free and a few other teenagers whom Eric knew she despised. Why did she insist on hanging out with those people? Brandine had to be forcing her into it. She seriously couldn't put up with this forever. But he knew once she found out about Brandine was cheating on her with Donna, she'd surely dump him. Hiccup would get involved. Things would be okay. It was these thoughts alone that had kept him in his seat for so long. He'd wanted to approach Hiccup before dinner, but found the chief to be extremely busy. In fact, he'd only just arrived at the Great Hall a few minutes ago, looking rather irritated. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he'd had just about as rough a day as Eric. Eric gritted his teeth together when he saw Brandine slide his filthy hands around Adriana's waist and pull her even closer. She wasn't even hiding her discomfort anymore. Now why didn't somebody do something? That was the real question. He looked around for Hiccup and Astrid, a council member, or anybody who claimed to be close to the Haddocks. Even Finn. All of them were completely occupied in their own little worlds, oblivious to Brandine's blatantly obvious mistreatment of his best friend, the chief's daughter. The thought nearly choked Eric. He'd had it. He wouldn't wait a second longer for a moment with the chief or for the right time to talk to Adriana herself, or heck, wait for Finn to wake up and look past his own nose. He wasn't going to wait for someone else to take care of this. He was going to take care of it right here, right now. As if on cue, Brandine promptly stood up from his table and marched toward the drink stand. Eric saw his chance and nearly slammed his palms into the table in his haste to confront the other teenager. He vaguely registered a comment in his direction from somebody, but he was so caught up in his mission that he didn't catch it. Brandine didn't seem to notice his approach, so he stood off to the side and waited. But then, Brandine smirked and said, "What's up, Larson?" Eric gritted his teeth. So he had really good peripheral vision. So what? What did you do to Adriana? Brandine narrowed his eyes and gave him a flat stare. I didn't do anything to her. And I suppose you didn't do anything to Cliff either. Eric hissed. The taller boy turned to him, arms crossed. What now? Don't play stupid with me. Eric growled. You think you're so suave and perfect and nobody notices your little schemes. What schemes? Brandine retorted. Dating the chief's daughter is a scheme now. Because really Eric, that's all this comes down to. You're just jealous. So back off. Brandine turned to grab the 2 cups he'd left on the table and prepared to leave. Eric stepped in his way with a defiant glare. No. A smirk rose to Brandine's face. He glanced over Eric's shoulder and quietly said, "Back off, Larson. You don't want to do this." "Oh, I think I do." Eric muttered. Since the day you showed up you've projected yourself like some kind of angel manifest from Valhalla, like you're the god's gift to mankind, able to get everything you want and please the people watching you, all while acting completely different when the adults aren't around. You're delusional. Brandine glared. Eric stepped closer so they were nearly nose to nose. Get off your high horse and look me in the eye. Brandine smirked and looked down. Eric felt like the height difference didn't even exist. You can fool every single person on the island, but you can't fool me. I will not sit by and watch you destroy my best friend's life. Do you even know what her favorite color is? Or what kind of books she likes to read? Or that she couldn't care less about that table full of jerks, and she'd rather be with you? Brandine shot. What, she'd rather be with you? A poor leather shop boy with a peg leg who meddles in her relationships. Eric rolled his eyes. Her dad has a peg leg, I don't think she cares about that, so it's stupid to even mention. Or did you forget that detail in that big brain of yours? Brandine's face began to redden. You'd better step aside before things get messy. Eric smirked. A little dirt never bothered me. Clearly. Brandine snipped, pushing past. But for the record, Adriana told me that after your little escapade the other day that she completely regrets it. She wouldn't go for you if you were the last guy around. That's not true and you know it. Oh trust me, Brandine smirked. She'd do me long before she'd do you. Eric fumed, his hands balling into fists. Don't talk about her like that. Like what? Brandine antagonized. Eric closed the gap between them again, ignoring the few people telling them to calm down nearby. Like she's some kind of object that only exists for your benefit. Because she's more than that. She's. Brandine grinned wolfishly. Or, look at you. Trying to be her personal little guard dragon. Well, let me tell you something, you're wasting your time. That girl is mine. And you know how I know that? Because I can get her to do anything for me, anything, you hear me? And by the time I'm finished with her she won't even remember your name. Whack. Brandine flew backward and slammed into a table. Eric shook off his hand, feeling the digits swelling already. He couldn't even remember pulling his fist back or considering the action. But the look of utter pride and power in Brandine's eyes was enough to make him sick. People jumped out of their seats in shock. A man tried to help Brandine to his feet, but he hopped up and shoved the man back. The Anderson boy wiped blood off his lip and, within a second, had launched himself at Eric. Eric braced himself for the collision, but the force still knocked the wind out of him, especially when they disrupted a second occupied table. The wooden edge dug into Eric's spine as Brandine hauled back a fist and punched him hard in the face. Eric growled and threw up his knee, catching Brandine in the stomach hard enough to make him stagger. Eric took advantage of his moment of distraction to tackle him to the floor, where they continued to fight. Eric blocked another hit to the face, catching it on his forearm, but Brandine was definitely stronger than he was. Brandine glared at him murderously as he continued to attack. Eric managed another offensive hit when suddenly Brandine slammed his hand against Eric's open throat and squeezed. People started yelling at Brandine to let go as Eric grappled at his arm. Suddenly two pairs of arms were around Brandine, pulling them off the ground. Eric fought to breathe, feeling like the skin of his face was going to burst like a balloon filled with water. Finn was there, threatening to break Brandine's arm if he didn't let go when suddenly a certain night fury jumped into the fray and roared in Brandine's face. Finally, Brandine released Eric, who dropped to the ground hacking. Eric choked on air, his throat throbbing. His heart pounded in his chest and blood pulsed in his ears. He hadn't known Brandine would be so violent. Somebody was talking to him, he realized. He focused and saw Gustav squatting in front of him, looking worried. Talk to me, Eric, are you all right? Should we go to Mara's? Eric shook his head. His voice cracked painfully and he bent over into a series of coughs. He could still feel Brandine's fingers wrapped around his throat like a vice. When the coughing subsided and he accepted a cup of water from a worried host, he noticed the yelling. He looked over to see Finn and Snotlout holding Brandine back while Hiccup tried to calm him down. Are you serious? Brandine shouted. He hit me first. How old are you? Hiccup interjected. 6. I don't care who started it or even what it was about, you could have seriously hurt him. Eric rubbed his throat. I think that was the point. He winced when his voice kept cracking. Hiccup turned a look at him over his shoulder, but Brandine spoke before he could. Maybe you should have used a little common sense than to hit an outcast. Last I checked you live on Burke now, Hiccup stated calmly, though Eric could tell his patience was wearing thin. We have different rules here. It's a reflex, Hiccup. I suppose all the rest of your garbage is a reflex too, then? Eric asked smartly. Hiccup gave him a warning look that spoke volumes. Then a certain blonde shoved into the group, her green eyes wide in shock. She looked like she wanted to run to Eric to see if she was okay, but she looked at Brandine with a look akin to fear. Like she was afraid to go to Eric or there would be consequences. Judging by the swelling of his vocal cords, Eric knew there would be consequences. Hiccup rested his hands on his hips, trying to maintain some sort of composure. Now what on earth is the problem that you two are handling this like children? Brandine roughly jerked his arm out of Finn's hold. He won't quit meddling in my relationship with Anna. Adriana seemed to shrink in on herself, which wasn't lost on her father. Eric glared. Like you really care about her anyway. Yes, I do actually. A heck of a lot more than you. Hiccup scowled. Stop arg. No, Hiccup, Brandine interjected, which only made the chief stiffen. I'm only protecting my half of the relationship here because Golden Boy over there is the one kissing my girlfriend behind my back. The crowd gasped, including Adriana. Eric was only slightly glad his face was already red, or else it would be going up in flames right now. Even Finn looked shocked at this development. Adriana's eyes were wide in complete horror. Eric glared at Brandine with complete loathing. Oh, you want to play that game? Hiccup said with an edge to his voice. Eric. Oh no, Eric plowed on, ignoring Hiccup even as he marched toward him. You don't get to make comments like that when you were razzing it up with Dana earlier. The crowd gasped once again, the room exploding into whispers and exclamations. Adriana's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Brandine honestly looked surprised, as if shocked that Eric had punched a hole in his boat of scandal and he was now sinking. Hiccup was on him before he could notice anything else. Stop it. Now. Eric stared into his eyes, honestly afraid of what might happen if he didn't. Hiccup didn't get angry often, but clearly he was at the end of his rope. At this point, he just wanted control over the situation. I want both of you boys outside now, Hiccup said loud enough for both of them to hear. If either of you start smack talking or fighting, I'm putting you in a cell for insubordination and disrupting the peace and my vridelicaty temper. Now move it. As he turned to leave, Eric glanced at Adriana, glad to see Finn ushering her away from prying eyes. Suddenly, he felt very, very guilty. He'd wanted to expose Brandine for who he was and make him leave her alone. Instead, he exposed her to all the gossip that was to come. He didn't feel like he made stupid decisions very often. But this had been a huge mistake from start to finish. Hiccup marched the two boys outside, his jaw working, and Eric suspected that he was holding back an explosion. Brandine sneered at him in his peripheral vision, as if he were the cause of this. But before he could open his mouth, Hiccup spoke, his voice shaking with rage. I don't want either do you talking to or touching my daughter. Do I make myself clear? Neither boy nodded. Eric thought that this was a bit rich considering he'd nearly gotten strangled defending her honor. As if Hiccup was allowed to make those decisions anyway. Brandine spoke up. You know, this is all his fault. Eric's jaw clenched, but he forced back the barrage of insults with difficulty. Oh, so it's Eric's fault you've been cheating on her? Hiccup said in a deadly whisper. I don't think so. If he hadn't. Hiccup took a sudden step forward, his face dangerously close to Brandine's. No, you listen carefully. I gave you a chance, but clearly that notion was ill-conceived from the start. Eric having feelings for my daughter doesn't make you run to a different girl. You don't care about Adriana enough to respect her, and you clearly don't respect me as her father or the chief, he said, practically spitting with rage. Brandine stared defiantly at him, not looking the least bit ashamed. Now here's what's going to happen, you are going to go to work, you are going to hang out with your little groupies, you're going to do anything but talk to her. And if I see you so much as blink at her the wrong way, I will ship you back to Outcast Island myself. Brandine didn't respond. Eric wondered why Hiccup didn't lose control and deck the cheating son of a half-troll himself. Clearly the man had a lot more self-restraint than he did. Hiccup leaned in even closer until his nose was in danger of touching Brandine's. Do I make myself clear? Brandine stared back smugly, barely blinking. Crystal. Then get out of my sight. Hiccup responded. Gladly, said Brandine, stopping only to send a dark look at Eric before he swaggered away. Eric barely had time to take a breath before Hiccup rounded on him. Have you completely lost your mind? Hiccup, I didn't. No, don't. No excuses from you. You know better how to handle conflict than like that. He gestured to the Great Hall as he spoke, and you know better than to be kissing girls who are dating, let alone my daughter. I know. Eric shouted before the chief could continue, his nerves already strained enough. I know that. Then why? Eric shook his head, not quite sure how to explain himself. I don't know. It's not like I went up to her, took her someplace secret and made out with her. For he stopped himself and sighed deeply, feeling his adrenaline ebbing away. I regretted it the second it happened. Hiccup crossed his arms, staring down at him stony-faced. I don't buy that for a second. The flicker of anger returned. Fine. Don't believe me because I did feel bad. But I'd do it again if it meant getting that scum away from her. That right there proves my point. Hiccup said, straightening to his full height and looking down at Eric like he was some kind of criminal. I understand your intentions are good, but this isn't about solving all of her problems, whatever they might be. That's what I'm here for. You know I'm an observant guy, Eric, so I know. Eric actually laughed at this. It was a mirthless laugh that caught even himself off guard for a split second. You. Observant. Give me a break. He was almost pleased to see Hiccup's face turn red with fury. Don't speak to me like that. Eric knew that what he was doing was akin to poking a sleeping Red Death in the eye, but he plowed forward anyway, his limbs shaking with anger. I'll speak any way I want to someone so oblivious that he can't even see that his own daughter, who he claims to love, is being gabuzzed. Don't you dare. I will dare if I have to be the one standing up for her. Eric bellowed. If you want to be her protector so bad, why did you completely ignore her while she made a dangerous mistake? I won't have you giving me parenting advice. Hiccup yelled back, he had clearly gone way beyond reason by this point. Oh. Afraid of admitting you were wrong? Well, don't apologize to me, apologize to your daughter. Eric turned on his remaining heel and started to stomp away. Come back here, Eric, we're not finished. Hiccup shouted after him. Put a cork in it. Eric turned back to see Hiccup trembling, his face red and his teeth gritted. You can't tell me what to do. You're not my father, Chief. And with that, not caring one bit about what he had just said, he marched off without bothering to look back. Adriana traipsed up to her room and shut the door. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She'd probably punch the next person she spoke to if she tried. Kicking the nightstand next to her bed, she sat down and put her head in her hands. She just needed to calm down, she thought, and she'd be okay. Adriana Miracle Haddock was always okay eventually. So much had happened in the last 2 days. And it all started and ended with Brandine. A new feeling coursed through her like fire ripping through a dry forest. Rage. It was rare for Adriana to become angry and even rarer for her to act on it. But today, she couldn't hold it back. It seemed to flow through her veins, forcing her to act lest she explode from inactivity. Suddenly, almost of its own accord, her foot slammed into the nightstand again. It was this or throw things around, but she didn't want to break her possessions. Wham! That was for stupid Eric blurting out her secrets to the whole town. Wham! For her best friend being poisoned and her being unable to do anything. For always being so helpless. Wham! For Brandine. She paused, taking deep breaths and yanking on her hair. Her heart was pounding in her chest at the thought, but she needed to think it. To keep it locked up would cause her to implode, and she couldn't afford to do that right now. She dry swallowed, finally allowing the barrage of thoughts and memories to rush through her brain. Rape. Brandine had raped her. Her anger mingled with despair as she finally sat back down. She hardly even noticed the throbbing in her foot from slamming into the nightstand so many times. It felt like the memories were crushing her, like her sanity had caved in completely. All her dreams seemed to slip through her fingers. She wasn't a virgin anymore. She'd lost her virginity in a barn. And worst of all, her virginity had been stolen from her. She'd never known how much the loss of something intangible could hurt so much. Nothing had ever made her feel so empty, so used, and so filthy than this. She was going to have to tell her future husband. How could she enjoy sex knowing how painful it could be? How disgusting it felt. If that was intimacy, she wanted no part of it. Just as the grief at what she had lost began to overtake her, she heard something clatter to the floor behind the nightstand. Thankful for the interruption, Adriana stood up and reached behind it, grasping something cold and metal in her hand and yanking it up. She sharply inhaled when she saw what it was in her hand. A beautiful, ornate necklace with perfectly cut purple stones in the shape of a rose rested in her palm, thankfully untarnished from its time between the wall and nightstand. Instantly the memory of that snuggle talk 4.5 years previously entered her mind. The final snuggle talk she had shared with Benen. And the necklace, this necklace, it was the last gift he'd ever given her. A wave of sadness overcame her at the thought. She didn't often think about Benen anymore. It was too painful. But now that she held the necklace in her hand, all the memories came flooding back. Skipping stones at the lake, tea at his house, even just sitting across from him and talking over dinner, these memories made her smile faintly through her heartache. Benen had always been a listening ear when she needed him, an advocate who always encouraged her if she wasn't feeling capable. With a pang, she realized that if anyone could tell her what to do now, it was him. Running her fingers over the pretty rose design, Adriana closed her eyes and willed herself to remember the warmth of his smile, the wisdom of his words, and the compassion he embodied through everything he did. More than anything, she wanted to walk over and ask him what to do, but he was gone. For the first time, she felt as Finn must feel every day. Like the one person in the world who was wise enough and kind enough to help her was gone forever. She couldn't tell her family about this. Not Eric or Cliff or Taryn either. Benen may have been Finn's best friend, but he had been her friend too. A memory flashed through her mind almost like Benen himself had sent it straight from Valhalla. It had been a dreadful day, she'd been mocked and pushed in the mud by the other girls and she was quite upset about it. Benen had come and helped her get cleaned up. Then they'd had tea and he had told her something she never forgotten. Courage is a lot more than not being afraid. It's about facing your fears and still fighting for what's right. And I see you do that every single day. Oh, you'll make mistakes and get hurt plenty more times, but I'm not worried about you. He'd known she would have the courage to do what was right, even when she was a child. How could she let him down now? Her fingers closed around the necklace. What was it that Benen used to say to Finn? Fortis. She was going to have to be strong. Like Benen. This time she wasn't going to run crying to Daddy or Eric or anyone. She could do this herself. It was in that moment, in her cluttered dusty bedroom, that she made a decision which would change her life. No more. She wasn't going to run away and cry over her problems. She wasn't going to be a burden on her family. She was going to grit her teeth and do what had to be done. And if there were consequences, they were for her to deal with, not anyone else. No more pity. No more excuses. No more letting people walk all over her. The sweet little victim was gone. She was going to do this alone. She was going to save her loved ones or die trying. She didn't matter anymore, not Raleigh. She wasn't worth anything, but they were worth everything. She couldn't turn on them like Finn had done. She loved her family and friends far too much for that, but she could keep them at arm's length now. Getting close to anyone had only caused her pain, and now it had taken away something valuable to her. She had made her decision. She wasn't going to stay with Brandine. She wasn't going to give her heart to Eric. From now on, she was going to stand alone. Adriana Miracle Haddock, the unshakable. She felt a surge of something she'd never felt before coursing through her. Was it strength? Perhaps it was just adrenaline. But she knew that she would have to act now lest the feeling subside. She stopped only to clasp her necklace around her neck and tuck it under her shirt. As long as she could feel its cool metal against her heart, she would be reminded of a man who believed that she could be strong no matter how frightened she was. As she descended the staircase, she spotted a dagger on the windowsill. A nearby rock indicated that it had been recently sharpened, which was perhaps why it was still lying there. She recognized it as one of her father's. Hiccup was a pacifist but, due to his chiefdom and role as the family protector, he was frequently armed when he went out. She found herself staring at the dagger, mesmerized for a moment. She wasn't the sort of person who felt the need to be armed at all times, but after what had happened in that barn, she certainly didn't want to take any chances. Her plan was unsafe and potentially terrifying. She was going to have to take some precautions. She picked up the dagger and stuck it in her belt. It felt odd against her pants, but she knew she'd grow accustomed to it. She would have to ask Finn or Eric to make her a sheath. Today was the day she took her life into her own hands. Not only was she going to break up with Brandine, she was going to make him leave so that he couldn't hurt anyone else. Pausing only to take a deep breath, she opened the door and faced the setting sun. This was it. The end of the pathetic victim and the birth of a strong, independent woman. With a small, confident smile, she marched down the hill to the village with her head held high. Chapter 8, Demons. Chapter text. It didn't take long for Adriana to begin to feel the first twinges of unease. As she marched through the village, certain that she was making the right decision, thoughts of her last few encounters with Brandine tried to edge their way into her brain. She ejected them as she marched. She would not be dissuaded. This was her decision to make, and only hers. The walk seemed to take seconds rather than minutes. Adriana and Brandine didn't live exceptionally close. Brandine was located on the edge of town, not too far away but certainly enough that he had some amount of privacy. If something went wrong, well, she wasn't going to consider that possibility. Just before she reached Brandine's, she caught sight of the path leading to the barns where it had happened. The sight filled her with determination. She almost didn't notice that she had finally reached Brandine's front door. She raised her fist and knocked before she would allow herself to doubt her mission. Brandine pulled open the door and his face broke into a smile. Adriana's heart seemed to drop somewhere in her stomach, but she stood tall. "Looks like you've made the right choice," said Brandine with a smile that would have been handsome if not for the maniacal glint in his dark blue eyes. "Took you long enough. Come on in." Adriana became uncomfortably aware that there was no one around. A few empty houses and barns were nearby, but she knew the owners and they were surely working right now. This showdown would have to be just her and Brandine. A tiny part of her, perhaps the anger that had built up from every single injustice in her life, was glad for this. "I'm not coming in. This isn't a social call," she said in a commanding voice that even took her by surprise. "I hope you're not going back on our little agreement." Brandine averted her gaze to stare in the direction of the village. "I wouldn't want to have to kill one of your silly people. It's exhausting, coming up with new ways to outwit your father." Adriana straightened herself up to her full height. She was still a full foot shorter than her boyfriend, but it gave her a lot more confidence nonetheless. "We're done," Brandine. The same commanding tone resonated through the house behind him. "You're going to leave everyone alone. And you're going to fly away from Burke. And you're not going to come back. Ever." Now that she had spoken the words, Adriana felt her resolve toughen. Her conditions were on the table. Brandine needed only to obey them and this would be over. She would be okay. Brandine let out a chortle. "You and what army? You didn't even bring Lily," he advanced menacingly. "But now that we're alone, how about a little repeat of our last date?" It happened so fast, Adriana wasn't fully aware of what was going on until Brandine's hands were fondling every inch of her that he could reach. Feeling disgusted, she tried to step back, but his hands tightened on her waist, drawing her in closer. He bit her lip harder than he ever had before, and if Adriana hadn't wrenched it out of his teeth, she was certain he would have broken her skin. "If you'd just obey me," Brandine whispered in a twisted sort of seductive tone, "this would have been a lot easier." A spark of fear burst forth, all but shattering her resolve. He was going to rape her again. This time, he might even kill her. And then there would be no one to stand between her and her family and friends as he went on to kill every last one of them. Their faces flashed in her mind, her parents, her brother, Cliff, Taryn, Inga, Helga, Eric. No. She wasn't going to let it happen. Not this time. As Brandine yanked her inside the house and threw her against the wall, pinning her hands behind her back, her fingers closed around the dagger. She drew it out slowly so that Brandine wouldn't see, and then, wriggling her arm free, she did something she never thought she would do. She slashed his face. Brandine let out a scream of pain and recoiled, his hands covering the right side of his face. Blood oozed between his fingers and he swore loudly. Adriana's hand shook rather violently, the dagger dripping blood onto her hand. Still, she held it up and stood her ground. Leave, she insisted, though her heart was drumming a tattoo against her ribs. Get out now and I won't send anyone after you. You can go free. Brandine, still covering his now mangled face, regarded her with the utmost hatred. Adriana held up her dagger as menacingly as she could, her whole body racked with both fear and determination. Have it your way. Brandine growled after a few seconds of tense silence. But you'll regret this. I regret every second we spent together. Adriana said scathingly. You're a monster. And I should have seen it. Perhaps. Brandine smiled. His teeth were tinged red from his blood. But the real monster's been right in front of you this whole time. You're just too naive to see it. Stop making excuses and leave. Adriana bellowed, detecting a tiny waver in her otherwise confident voice. Oh, I'll go. Peacefully. Brandine paused only for a moment to regard her with the same soulless stare before he walked out of his house and whistled for his dragon. The changeling was at his side in seconds. Adriana was confused. Why hadn't he called the dragon before now? And then the sight of the bags tied to the reptile answered her question. Brandine had packed. He was already leaving. Before mounting his dragon, Brandine reached into a bag and pulled out a handkerchief, which he pressed to his face to stem the bleeding. Then he mounted the changeling and turned to face her. Later, Nani. Enjoy your happy ending with Eric, he said in a sickeningly sweet voice. He then leaned forward, his visible eye narrowed. Until we meet again. And with that, without so much as a single blow thrown or a weapon raised against her, he flew away from Burke. The Haddock girl walked out of the house and watched until he disappeared into the horizon. A wave of relief crashed over her so suddenly, she wondered if she'd ever breathe properly again. She barely registered her nausea flaring up again before she vomited onto the grass below. Turning toward the village so she could walk home, she barely advanced 5 steps before her legs felt like they'd turned to jelly and she collapsed onto her hands and knees. Her breaths came in short gasps, sweat trickling down her face. But a swooping feeling had filled her as well, a feeling of accomplishment and victory. He was gone. She was free. She wasn't sure how long she was sitting there on the ground, but by the time she got up, the sun was disappearing into the trees. Adriana's feet dragged as she walked through the village, arms wrapped around her chest protectively. She ignored everybody she passed. In fact, she barely noticed them. Brandine was gone. The boy she'd met on her travels with her father 3 years ago, who she'd reached out to and befriended, who had moved to Burke and become her first boyfriend, the boy who she'd trusted with every secret and hope and dream. No. It turned out that innocent boy she thought she'd known had been gone for quite some time. When exactly he'd left, she'd never know. But it was the arrogant, filthy man who'd finally left her today. She felt some form of relief, knowing he wouldn't be following her around and she wouldn't have to succumb to his demands anymore. Images of Cliff sick and Brandine choking Eric made her shiver in fear. Brandine was gone, therefore, so was the threat. He couldn't hurt her or her friends anymore. Still, dating was an investment. They'd dated for so long, she'd thought it was real. She thought they'd one day get married, build a nice house, raise a few kids and start a new adventure together. Over the last few months, doubts had started creeping into her mind, especially when she thought about Eric. And not just about the kiss. She'd been wondering for some time now if she was more compatible with Eric than Brandine. Whatever the case, Brandine had shown his true colors and lack of morality to the core. He'd taken what he wanted, whether it was an overall lack of patience or true cruelty she didn't know. Whatever the specifics didn't matter. Brandine had raped her and there was no changing that. The thought still made every muscle in her body tense in fear and anger. You don't get to make comments like that when you were razzing it up with Dana earlier. Eric's voice echoed in her mind once again and she growled aloud, walking faster once her house came into view. The thought of Brandine raping her was enough to push her toward the edge anyway. She still couldn't fully wrap her mind around the fact that such a horrible, disgusting, invasive thing had happened to her. But to find out after the fact that Brandine had been cheating on her with Dana. He was probably getting some on the side this whole time, so why even rape her at all? What was the purpose? Was he seriously that egotistical that he had to conquer her as well? How many girls had he been with since they'd started dating? Did he ever care for her at all? Or was she really that naive and ignorant and starry-eyed for a boy who was really a demon in disguise? Adriana shoved the front door open, pleased to find the house empty. No parents who'd want to talk things over, no strong brother to be big and mighty, no dragons to sniff her clothes and find Brandine's blood on her sleeve or on the handle of her dagger. Even Lily, her beloved monstrous nightmare, was out of the house, quite possibly looking for her elsewhere. Staring around the darkened house, Adriana felt a strange sense of foreboding. She didn't feel warmth and comfort here like she used to. This house didn't hold a sense of security, it wasn't a sanctuary anymore where she could hide from her demons until she felt ready to emerge again. Brandine's demon never slept. He never left. The roughness of his touch, the heat of his gaze, the cruelty in his eyes followed her wherever she went. Sleep made no difference for he chased her in dreams as well. There was no escaping him, even though he'd physically left. A single hiccup escaped her and she realized she was crying, standing in the middle of her family's dark living room feeling cold and alone and afraid. Was it so bad to want to feel truly wanted? Was it such a bad thing to desire a normal life without bad things happening at every turn? Adriana wiped her eyes and stifled her cries. She felt a surge of anger take over and she glared at the floorboards, willing herself to stop crying. Tears would not fix this. Though Brandine had left, he was not completely gone. She couldn't erase him from her memory, but she could definitely erase all traces of him that she had left. She could make it look like he'd never been here, at least in her house. Stomping up the stairs, Adriana set to purifying her bedroom from the filth of her ex-boyfriend. She dumped out a few boxes of random things and threw everything that Brandine had ever given her into them. Flowers she'd dried in books, a few books that she really hadn't liked anyway, jewelry, painted rocks they'd found in the woods, random trinkets he'd made or traded from Johann, even clothing. Sure she'd found everything, Adriana hefted the boxes to the backyard one by one. There she threw everything in a heap a safe distance from the house. She felt crazy as she hauled handfuls of wood from the barn and threw them haphazardly onto the pile. Her hands shook as she tried to light matches. She sorely wished any of her family's dragons were here to make it easier, but with dragons came family, and they'd surely try to stop her. Her parents would probably say this wasn't the way to handle the problem. They'd want to smooth things over once she calmed down and try to figure out what she wanted to do next. Adriana didn't want to talk things over and she certainly didn't know what she wanted to do next. She just wanted it all to burn. Finally, the matches caught on the various belongings. Within minutes the flames rose and thick smoke plumed into the air. Adriana's chest hurt as she watched, but it wasn't enough. She wanted to break things. Anna. Adriana whipped around at the sound of her brother's voice, who was jogging past the house toward her. Finn's eyes widened at the sight of the fire, then focused on her. "Are you okay?" The blonde gritted her teeth and sniffed. "Oh yes. I'm perfectly fine." She faced the flames once again. She heard her brother sigh and felt him move closer. "Anna. I'm sorry about what happened earlier." Adriana felt a flash of rage in her chest. He didn't even know half of what she'd been through for that sick jerk. "Don't be. Hard times make you stronger anyway, don't they?" Adriana ignored her conscience as she said, "What is it you always say? Fortis. Finn looked at her in concern. Anna, these things take time. Nobody's expecting you to instantly bounce back from. Just leave me alone. Finn shook his head. Anna, don't push, his voice faltered. Is that blood? Adriana flinched when his hand touched her arm, not out of fear of him but of the questions he might ask. She retracted her arm and looked at the sleeve, spotting Brandine's blood. Then she remembered Brandine had given her this sweater. Adriana tore the clothing from her body, ignoring the chill biting through her undershirt, and threw it into the fire. How had she not remembered? Sparks flew toward the twins, making Finn pull her back. She jerked out of his grasp. Stop, I don't need your help. Finn sighed. Anna, let me see your arm. I'm not hurt. Will you just let me see it? No. Adriana yelled. She turned to move away but his hand on her elbow stopped her. With an angry outburst, Adriana wrenched her arm out of his grasp and slapped his face. Finn jerked from the impact, clearly shocked. She froze. Adriana looked at her swelling palm and stepped back. Finn slowly opened his eyes and seemed to survey her expression carefully. Finn. Adriana swallowed, her voice cracking. I'm sorry. Anna, it's. Adriana's eyes burned, watching as his cheek flamed almost as bright as his hair. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She turned his face and brushed a hand against the inflamed skin, ignoring him when he held her wrists. I'm so sorry. Anna, it's okay. No, it's not, she shouted, staring up at him with wide eyes. I hit you. Anna, you have every right to be angry about everything that happened today. Brandine, Eric, Donna, all of it. That doesn't mean I should take it out on you. Adriana shouted, feeling something snap inside. I've never been like that, I don't want to be like that. What's wrong with me? Hey, Finn stepped closer to her, hands out in placating manner. Nothing is wrong with you. Adriana felt her eyes burning. She shakily inhaled as she fought tears. I wasn't good enough. I'm never good enough. Why do these things always happen to me? Her voice broke. When her brother stepped forward and pulled her into his chest, she clung to him tightly. Finn had never seemed like a hugger, but the family had realized in the last year and a half that when he was hurting, a hug could completely alter the course of his day. Since the rape, Adriana could barely stand being around men. Even her dad's gentle patting of her shoulder that morning had made her flinch. But wrapped in her brother's strong arms she felt secure and safe. Nobody could hurt her while Finn was here. Finn was at a loss. He knew pain and suffering. He knew the cries of brokenness from the slave trade. Though he didn't have nightmares as often anymore, he could still vividly remember the pain marked into his mind and body. He had no doubts, his sister was in agony. Finn hadn't been sure how she'd react when he hugged her. But he'd been both surprised and concerned when she literally clung to him like someone was going to snatch her away. She'd buried her face into his chest and openly sobbed. Usually she'd try to hide her emotions, especially tears, when Finn was around. Her crying always annoyed him when they were little. Now he felt like someone was ripping a cloth off a half-healed wound. Finn wrapped her up more in his arms, unsure what to do or what to say. He watched everything burn that Brandine had ever given her. He wanted to track down that jerk and make him pay for making his sister cry like this. He wanted to make him pay for making her promises and treating her like a princess and then cheating behind her back. He wanted to wring that guy's neck for hurting Eric and playing them all like fools. But he kept all these thoughts at bay and forced himself to relax. He didn't want to crush his twin. It was a long while before Adriana began to calm down. Her grip on him slackened and she leaned against him heavily, clearly exhausted. Finn noticed they'd been standing outside long enough for the fire to die down and the stars to twinkle above their heads. Anna. Finn murmured. Adriana stirred, but didn't seem to have the energy to move. Finn pursed his lips before making a decision. Carefully he twisted and bent down enough to slide an arm underneath her knees. When he picked her up and cradled her against his chest, she gave a startled squeak but quickly relaxed again. Finn walked toward the house, just managing to open the back door and walk inside. As he walked, he noticed in curiosity that a bruise the size of a thumb was on her forearm. Just as he walked toward the staircase, the front door opened and their parents walked in, looking worn and weary. Hiccup's weariness fled the second he saw his children. Both parents instantly marched forward when they saw Adriana's condition. "She's okay," Finn whispered, turning and taking her upstairs. He didn't hear his parents follow behind him. Quickly and carefully he laid his sister down on her bed, shucked her boots, and draped a blanket over her. With a sad frown, he bent down to kiss her forehead. Adriana's puffy eyes opened a smidge. "I'm sorry." Finn gave her a wan smile. "You have nothing to apologize for, Anna. Just get some sleep, okay?" Adriana nodded and snuggled deeper into her pillow. Finn walked out of the room and grabbed her door. But just before it closed, he heard a quiet, "Thanks, Finnegan." He closed her door with a smile and tramped back downstairs where his worried parents were still waiting. "What happened?" Hiccup asked before he even reached the bottom step. Finn sighed. "She burned everything Brandine ever gave her." "What?" Astrid strode to the back door and flung it open to reveal the dying embers in the backyard. "Everything. I assume everything." Hiccup huffed. "Did she say anything?" Finn frowned. "Other than asking why and trying to take the blame for Brandine's everything?" "No." Hiccup's scowl deepened at the mention of the young man. "What did he say when you talked to him?" Finn asked, crossing his arms. Hiccup met Astrid's eyes when she returned to their side. "He didn't say anything. By the time I got to his house, he was gone." "What?" Finn gasped. "He took off." "What a coward." "That's what I said." Astrid huffed. "No matter. We don't need him around anymore." Hiccup said. "My concern is the blood." "Blood?" Finn echoed. Astrid nodded. There was fresh blood on the floor, not far from the door. Everything was cleared out so there was no sign of a scuffle, but something seems to have gone wrong. Finn looked at his father. "Eric?" "No, he was getting patched up at Taryn's." Hiccup sighed. "He's another story." "Well, if it wasn't Eric, who'd?" Finn stopped. Astrid leaned forward. "What is it?" Finn chewed his lip. There was blood on Anna's sweater. Instantly the parents looked on edge. "Where?" Hiccup demanded. "Just on the sleeve," Finn said. "But when I asked her about it, she took it off and threw it into the fire. It wasn't a lot but enough for me to notice." "When was this?" "I don't know, 45 minutes ago, maybe." Hiccup sighed. "We went to Brandine's a half hour ago. I wanted to give him time to cool off before." "Correction," Astrid interrupted. "We wanted to give you time to cool off." Rolling his eyes, Hiccup waved a hand in circles. "Something happened long before we got there then." Finn winced. "Do you think Anna would challenge him?" Hiccup sat down in a nearby chair as he thought. "That's not really her style." "No, but neither is carrying a weapon around. Or slapping." "She hit you." "Not hard enough if it's not obvious." Hiccup sighed. "Okay, granted she has every right to be upset about the cheating and Eric's causing a scene. But why did she go over there? She wasn't even supposed to talk to him," Astrid added. "No offense to Finn," Hiccup said. "But neither of our children seem to have made obedience a priority." Finn winced again. "None taken." "What weapon did she?" Hiccup frowned, his gaze finding the windowsill, where the dagger he'd been sharpening was no longer sitting there. "Okay, so maybe she went over there to officially break up with him, but why did she take my dagger?" Finn glanced over and noticed the missing dagger as well. He turned back to his parents. There was. He stopped, unsure if he wanted to mention the bruise. He already knew his parents had a rough day. He wasn't sure how much he wanted to reveal, especially if Brandine was already gone. He knew his dad would jump to conclusions and try to drag Adriana out of bed to search her head to toe for every injury he could find. He didn't want that for her, he wanted to let her rest while she could. If he didn't have proof of anything going wrong for sure, then he shouldn't mention any suspicions he might have. "Right. There was?" Astrid asked. Finn shrugged. "I don't know, it wasn't a lot of blood. Only a few drops on her sleeve." Maybe it happened somewhere else. His parents frowned, unsure. I think there's a lot more to this story than any of us knows. Hiccup said at last, sighing deeply and resting the side of his head on his palm. But we won't get any answers out of Addie tonight. We could always try to go after Brandine. Astrid suggested. No. Hiccup said this firmly, as if that was the last thing he felt like doing. He's gone. And good riddance to him. If I ever see his face again. Get in line. Finn seethed. Because I want a crack at him too. The sides of Hiccup's mouth quirked upward, though he didn't fully smile. I think I'm going to turn in, he said, getting up and stretching his arms over his head. This has been the worst day and I'm not enduring any more of it. I'll be right up. Astrid called up to him as he ambled up the stairs. She waited until he was out of earshot before turning back to Finn. Listen, I know Hiccup can be a bit smothering. Especially when Audrey is concerned. So if there's anything you didn't say. Finn felt a tightness in the pit of his stomach. He knew his mother would be furious at the thought of Adriana being abused, but at the same time, he hadn't asked Adriana about it himself. If he sounded the alarm prematurely, that would be a lot of unwanted attention on his already emotional sister. Nothing. Finn shrugged. Nothing important, anyway. Just let her sleep, Mom. Astrid looked up at Adriana's bedroom door almost wistfully. Finn knew she wasn't the sort of person who always verbalized how she felt, but Astrid loved her daughter very much. If there was anything she could do to help, he knew that she would. Unfortunately, he wasn't sure there was anything to be done at all this time. It had been a mercifully dreamless sleep. Adriana awoke to find her body tightly curled into a ball under her covers. It was so comfortable, she didn't want to get up. She didn't want to face the world after the events of yesterday, and she felt slightly embarrassed about losing it in front of Finn. He would surely have told her parents by now. Yet again, she found herself at a crossroads. She could do what she always did, cry and mope and hug her parents and try to forget about Brandine. Or she could deal with this on her own. She wasn't helpless. In less than a month, she would be 17, and with that, she would be legally allowed to do almost anything she wanted. She could move out on her own. The thought made her insides freeze. She was definitely not ready for that. But she could do plenty now. It didn't take long for her to make up her mind. She threw the covers off and climbed out of bed. After her morning routine, she grabbed some bread for breakfast and tied her hair back in a long braid. She tossed a few fish to Lily before heading out to the barn, the monstrous nightmare eagerly following. All right, Lily, she said, grabbing her saddle off its peg, what do you say? Lily hopped up and down eagerly. She and Adriana hadn't flown in a while. The girl simply didn't feel like it in the midst of her problems with Brandine, and Lily wasn't the sort of dragon to push her into doing something she didn't want to do. The moment Adriana mounted Lily, the two were off. Lily did a lap around Burke, cheerfully crooning as she did so. The haddock girl took a deep breath of chilly air, feeling freer than she had in a very long time. She wouldn't have to work until that evening, so she had plenty of time to swoop and dive and fly higher than ever before. Burke shrunk to a tiny dot in the vast expanse of the ocean below. Adriana looked around, spotting the coastline of Brawn far in the distance. She knew that Outcast Island was in the other direction from all her flights there when. She shook her head vehemently. Brandine was dead to her. There had to be a way to make herself forget. Higher, she whispered to Lily, who obliged. The air was cold up here. It was a nice break from the hot weather far below. A bit of lingering tenderness stopped her thoughts of doing a few tricks. But maybe taking it easy was a good idea. Thanks, she said to her dragon, patting her on the head. Lily crooned in a friendly sort of way. Adriana could tell that she was worried. The girl hoped all traces of him were gone now. Feeling a small flicker of daring, Adriana unhooked herself from her dragon and slid down her neck to rest on her back. The rhythmic flapping of Lily's wings made her feel almost drowsy, despite just waking up. But she needed to clear her mind. She needed to relax. Lily began to slowly circle above, apparently deciding that she didn't want to stay in one place while her rider was taking a much-needed break from the world. Adriana remembered seeing some of her father's reclining positions on Toothless. Even lying down, he would keep his foot and prosthetic strapped in to avoid any accidents. She felt a spark of adrenaline knowing that she had no such safety precautions. If she slipped off Lily, she would tumble down and splat somewhere in the ocean or on Burke. She tried to avoid thinking about the gruesome sight some unlucky Burkean would come across if she plummeted to her death down there. But at the same time, she kind of liked the idea. It was fascinating in a horribly morbid sort of way. What kind of casket would they put her remains in if she died that day? Adriana didn't think about death often, but, for some reason, thinking about her pyre was very interesting. Surely it would be bedecked in flowers, especially the purple ones. Over a decade later and she still loved purple. She liked the idea of burning along with hundreds of flowers and maybe the drawing Eric had given her when they were small. What was she thinking? She was 16, for Thor's sake. Why was she thinking about such a grisly death when, of course, her dragon would catch her well before she was in any real danger? Did normal people think about such things? It wasn't as if she was suicidal. She wouldn't actually jump to her. Well. Adriana turned her head and looked down at the speck of land that was Burke. She would have quite a way to fall before she was even near it. Plenty of time to be caught. It was a crazy idea. Her father was the sort of person to leap off his dragon and plummet to the ground before extending the wings of his flight suit and gliding until he found land or Toothless saved him from some stupid mishap on his part. It was a wonder he survived to have children considering the stunts he did when he was her age. She'd never thought about following in his footsteps in that particular way. Plenty of people said she and Hiccup were very much alike, but flying, while fun, wasn't Adriana's thing the way it was Hiccup's. She certainly had the instincts, she'd learned that in lessons, but she'd never felt a real urge to push the limits like her parents. Not even Finn was as daring as they were, though that was mostly due to Tornado's grouchiness and Zap's young age. But Adriana, the old one at least, never took risks quite like that. Little Addie Haddock played with dolls and wore flowers and colorful skirts and didn't like seeing people cry and always did what was safe and sweet and smart, and that was what had gotten her in this mess in the first place. And she was done. She was sick of being the daddy's girl. She was sick of wearing her heart on her sleeve only to have it smashed to pieces. She was sick of humiliation and unkind words. As far as she was concerned, it was a mistake ever to be like that in the first place. No one got where they were by being nice and cautious. Almost before she had fully thought about what she was doing, she stood up. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Lily start and turn her head to stare at her, wide-eyed. But Adriana didn't care. She trusted Lily. She was surprisingly unafraid. The same fire inside her that had gotten rid of Brandine now burned within her and she felt reckless. It was a perfect dive. Adriana sped downward so fast, she could hear the wind whistling in her ears. Her sinuses cleared, her vision swam before her eyes, but she kept falling. She could barely see Lily descending nearby, poised to catch her before she came close to hitting the ground. The sensation was indescribable. To be completely free, the wind in her hair and nothing around her but the sky and the air was amazing. It was the freest she'd ever felt in her life. Her problems seemed to have flown out of her as she sped toward the ground. The whole expanse of the archipelago opened up to her in a way she'd never seen it before. There was no dragon beneath her to control her fall. It was only her and the sky. What a feeling. This was incredible. This was exactly what she needed right now. No one could hurt her in the air. No one could tell her what to do or how to feel. No one could do anything at all. Finally, the ground came a little too close for comfort and she reached out for Lily's horn. Lily flew over and allowed her to mount upside down before straightening herself out. Now they were flying far below where they had been and it was a moment before Adriana realized she was laughing. The girl laughed until she could hardly breathe, until tears ran down her face. She had been in so much danger and it was worth it. It was worth every second, every pump of adrenaline. It was the best she'd felt in such a long time. She hoped no one had seen her, otherwise she would likely get an outrageously hypocritical lecture from her parents about safety measures. But she didn't care. The danger, the threat of imminent death, that was what made it so much fun. The freedom to end everything if she so wanted. Okay, she wheezed, directing her dragon upward. What do you say, Lily? Go again. Lily gave her a concerned squawk, but the haddock girl didn't care. She'd jump off anyway. Then Lily would have to catch her. As they flew upward, Adriana found that she liked this new person she was becoming quite a lot. The old one had been an insecure, emotional basket case. But this girl was almost worthy of the haddock name and lineage. She only wished it hadn't taken nearly 17 years for her to stop caring anymore. Chapter 9, Thistles. Chapter text. Monday morning had to be the quietest thing Eric had ever experienced. No mother to knock on his door to wake him up, no Cliff to complain loudly that he'd left a dirty dish out, just silence. And it was the worst sort of silence. Eric rose out of bed, his head throbbing. He dearly wanted to roll over and go back to sleep, but he was probably already late for work. Allowing himself a minute to rub his eyes, wincing when he touched the sore one, and put his head in his hands, he felt the full weight of the previous night fall upon him. He'd blurted out to the whole village that Adriana's boyfriend was a cheater. He had then accused Hiccup of not caring about his own daughter. And now everyone knew about his moment of weakness at Troll Bridge. The desire to go back to bed intensified. He did not want to show his face in the village after all that. He didn't want to face an angry Hiccup or, worse, an angry Adriana. And Brandine, gods, this was going to be a very, very long day. Eric swung his legs over the edge of his bed and attached his prosthetic. He felt a bit shaky on it, whether from exhaustion or a loose screw somewhere he didn't know. He didn't particularly care. He wasn't going to be running all over Burke today anyway. He expected someone to call out to him on his way to work, but no one did. By the time he was pushing open the door, he was breathing a sigh of relief. The last thing he needed was the watchful eye of the village upon him as he went about his daily business. "You're late," Horst said, not looking up from his work. "But it's fine. We've got a lot to do and Cliff's not here, so if you could get on it right now, that'd be great." "Right. Yeah." Eric sighed and sat down at his desk, immediately getting to work. 2 years ago, long stretches of silence were normal during the workday. Now they were agonizing. It wasn't as if Cliff was there every second of every shift. He'd been out sick a few times, but Eric had always known he would burst into the room within the week more boisterous than before. But now, sitting alone in the office and trying to focus on his work, Eric found himself missing the constant chatter that annoyed him to no end. The very idea of never hearing it again made his insides writhe. Cliff was loud, rambunctious, and full of bizarre stories that seemed to have no point at all, but that was why Eric liked him. He made each day different and exciting. Now he was holed up in the healers. Okay, so he wasn't dying. He would be back in a day's time at most. But the sight of him sweating and convulsing, his skin pale and his eyes wide and fearful, wasn't about to leave Eric's head anytime soon. For one horrible moment, he had been terrified that his best friend was going to drop dead in that hole before anyone could get him the help he needed. And if that had happened, all the chatter, all the stories, all the noise would be gone. Forever. His thoughts drifted to Brandine and he nearly broke the tool he was holding. That disgusting excuse for a human being had clearly hurt one of the people he loved most and, though Eric wasn't completely sure, endangered another loved one. He didn't care what Hiccup had said. He'd deserved a punch in the face. He deserved a whole lot more. The sound of the office door opening nearly made Eric fall off his stool. It wasn't close to break time yet and he'd been concentrating on repairing a large rip in Thorin's saddle. What oh? Eric whipped around and found himself face to face with Hiccup. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. "Hi." He saw Hiccup give him a half smile as he sat on Cliff's stool. "How's your eye?" "Fine. Looks worse than it is." "And your throat?" "Pretty good. Bit scratchy, but even that's going away." Eric stared down at his hands. "Good, good," Hiccup said somewhat vacantly. Eric felt words bubble up within him, but he clenched his jaw shut for a second before deciding to speak. "Look, Hiccup, I'm sorry about what I said. It was stupid and I don't actually think you don't care about Annie. It's all right," Hiccup said in a calm tone. I think we both said things we didn't mean. He paused for a moment and Eric chanced to glance upward. Hiccup looked like he was contemplating something. Finally, he met Eric's eye. Look, what I said about me being there to solve her problems, that's not exactly true. I've been doing a terrible job of it. I wouldn't say terrible. I would. Hiccup sighed, he looked emotionally pained. She's not coming to me for as much as she did when she was little. I'm not saying she shouldn't figure a few things out on her own, but I don't know. He rubbed his eyes. She didn't tell me anything about her and Brandine. I had no idea he was that violent, and I certainly would have put a stop to the relationship if I'd known. Of course you would. And you'd have done it in a much more mature way than I did. Oh no, I wouldn't. Hiccup was smiling almost savagely. If I'd known then what I know now, I'd have socked him too. Eric's heart plummeted. What do you know now? It wasn't just cheating, Eric. I don't know much more, but he really broke her heart. And he just left with no warning. He left. House was cleared out. Only thing we've been able to piece together is that there was some sort of incident that happened before he took off. But none of us knows what it is, except Addie probably. But she's not saying a thing. Hiccup looked down for a moment before meeting Eric's eye again. Is there anything you can tell me? I don't want you to betray her trust, but I don't want her to keep suffering like this, like she always does, and then me just watching it and unable to do a thing. Eric was taken slightly aback. There was genuine anguish in Hiccup's eyes. A father is supposed to protect his children from pain like that, but Hiccup, through one tragedy after another, couldn't do it the way most parents could. It wasn't for a lack of trying or a lack of love, he did both in abundance. But perhaps it was simply entering adulthood that made Eric realize that parenthood was truly heartbreaking. The evidence was right in front of him. I don't know much, Hiccup. Eric replied to his question. I wish I did. But I think it would be better to hear it from her, anyway. Right, said Hiccup. Sorry. Didn't mean to dump my parenting woes on you. It's okay. Eric waved away his apology. But I've got a question for you. Hit me. Just hitting Brandine was enough. Eric flexed his fingers and Hiccup actually let out a small laugh. Anyway, I've always wanted kids, but seeing you like this, is it worth it? Absolutely. Hiccup said immediately. I loved Finn and Addie the second I saw them, and so did Astrid. Nothing that happened to them or that they did themselves would ever change that. But it's been painful. Life is painful, Eric. You know that as well as I do. Hiccup straightened up. It wasn't always miserable. For every time I've cried over those two, there's been about a dozen moments they've made me laugh or made me proud. You live for those moments, even when they are few and far between. Don't swear off kids on my account. Will do. Or won't do. Eric shrugged. Well, anyway, I'm sorry. Me too. Hiccup ruffled his hair before standing up. I've got some work to do, but I think we should start getting breakfast together again sometime. Sounds good. Eric waited until Hiccup had vacated the shop before returning to his work. That was a lot less painful than he'd expected, considering their last encounter. Shouting at Hiccup truly was the only part of that evening he regretted. He loved Hiccup like a father, though perhaps not his father. Olaf had been another story altogether. But as a surrogate, Hiccup had stepped up remarkably well considering his full schedule and all those different personalities under his roof. Eric knew only one thing for certain regarding Hiccup: he wasn't going to let one argument ruin their relationship. And, from the way Hiccup had spoken to him just now, it seemed he had come to the same conclusion. As much as he loved his aunt, Cliff couldn't help but think that extended time in the healers was pure agony. He'd drawn plenty of silly cartoons on a pad of parchment he'd found, but without anyone to show them to, he might as well have slept all morning. He felt fine. His incident the previous day had been scary for sure, but with a good night's sleep, he was ready to leave. Of course Mara would want him around for observation. More like torturation. Home. Not his best joke. Lying on his back, his head dangling over the edge of his bed just because he could, he was seriously considering going outside, running a few laps around Mara's to get out his excess energy. Before he had a moment to really think about it, someone knocked on his door. "It's open," he called. He was surprised, but quite pleased, that it was Taryn who emerged from behind the door and not some healer's assistant. Taryn was carrying a small flower in a pot and smiling awkwardly at him. I just wanted to see how you were doing," she said, shrugging her shoulders. "And I brought you this. Kind of a get-well-soon gift." She paused, staring at him. "What are you doing?" "Oh, counting the lines on the floorboards," said Cliff. "Well, you must be feeling better then." She placed the flower, which was covered in prickles, on his nightstand and sat down on a chair next to his bed. Cliff flipped over so that the world righted itself and took in the appearance of his friend, his face reddening in embarrassment at having been in such an odd position when she arrived. Taryn's hands were covered in a white dust that Cliff suspected to be flour. Her hair was up in a messy bun that would have made her mother cringe. Then eyed the flower for a moment before grinning. "Thanks, Taryn. I know this'll make me feel even better in no time," he said with a wink. Taryn snorted. "Woo-oh," she said before dissolving into giggles. It seemed the awkwardness was broken in an instant. Cliff's grin widening, he decided to chance another pun. "All I've been able to do is stare out the window. Wish I could leave. I'm really lavender weather outside." Taryn laughed at this joke as if it was the funniest thing she'd heard in years. She had to be the best audience he'd ever had. "Sorry," she wheezed. I didn't know you were such a pun master." "Why, Taryn, I am the pun master. Punsational. Punlarious. And possibly pun-intentional." Taryn laughed again. "You need to get yourself looked at again. I think your irony levels are a tad high." It was Cliff's turn to howl with laughter. Prim, proper Taryn just told him a joke. And not just any joke, one this bad had to be celebrated. "You are full of surprises," Cliff said once his laughter subsided. "I didn't know you shared my love for bad puns." "I'm not serious all the time, Cliff," Taryn said. "Everyone's got a sense of humor, don't they? I wonder about some people." Cliff sighed dramatically. "Maybe they forgot how to laugh. A depressing existence. My brother was a goofball. Both are." Where the smile melted off Taryn's face. "I'm sorry, it's been almost 2 years now." "Oh." Cliff wasn't expecting the mood to evaporate so quickly. "No, it's all right. I'm fine." Taryn shook her head. "I shouldn't bring the mood down while you're still recovering. That's not fair to you." "It's fine. I liked Kurt. I mean, I didn't know him super well or anything, but everyone liked him and out." Cliff looked down at his pad of parchment for a moment. "You can talk about him if you want. I'm all ears. Maybe some other time," Taryn said with a tiny smile. "But for now, I want to hear more of your punterical jokes." "You sure?" "Yep." Taryn leaned forward. "Okay. If you're ready for it." Knock knock. Taryn's smile widened. "Who's there?" "Dishes." "Dishes who?" "Dishes a very bad joke." With that, Taryn and Cliff told each other increasingly ridiculous jokes until Mara told them off for laughing too loudly. By the time Taryn left the healers, Cliff was sad to see her go. It seemed that there was more to Mama Taryn than even he knew. Astrid wasn't paying much attention to the 11-year-olds she was teaching some basic flying maneuvers. This resulted in fish legs preventing 2 girls from ramming their dragons into each other in midair. But even then, Astrid couldn't tear her mind away from the previous night. So, when she finally completed her lessons for the day and assisted various villagers with random tasks Hiccup wasn't able to get to, she went deep into the woods, her favorite axe strapped to her back. She thought best while she was mutilating trees. The whir of the axe and thunk into the tree's bark made her smile in satisfaction. She already felt better. After a few practiced throws, she began to put her arms and shoulders into each swing. Soon, one of her axes split a smaller tree cleanly in half. But she wasn't paying enough attention to be proud of this accomplishment. Her mind was solely on her daughter. Breakups were hard, no doubt about that, but Adriana had not only cried until she could hardly breathe but had also burned everything Brandine had given her. This couldn't be normal behavior. Paranoia over the twins' emotional states was usually Hiccup's forte. Still, something was deeply troubling about this. She didn't like seeing Adriana suffering any more than Hiccup did, though she was far less vocal or emotional about it. But when Hiccup had spoken to her at breakfast that morning, he didn't seem at all concerned. They barely broached the topic at all, and when they did, Hiccup had insisted that she'd surely cried it out and would be okay in no time, with enough love and encouragement from them. Astrid couldn't help but think it was downright bizarre that she was the one worried about Adriana and her husband wasn't. Sometimes, Astrid wished that she could approach parenting with the same softness and tenderness that so many mothers seemed to take naturally. Granted, she didn't look her crying toddler in the eye and tell her to suck it up, but she certainly didn't feel like letting her cry all over her shoulder either. The truth was that she and Adriana were so fundamentally different that they both had to make compromises. For a while, they would go out and practice archery together, and Astrid quite enjoyed listening to the strange and creative ideas her daughter would share with her on these occasions. Then puberty set in and Adriana had gone from being a starry-eyed child to a hormonal wreck. Finn hadn't been a picnic either, but at least he had ended up quite a bit like his mother. Astrid had backed off when it came to her daughter's relationships. She didn't want to be an overbearing mother, especially since Hiccup was already quite adamant about keeping her safe on a physical and emotional level. Still, after all that, Adriana had gotten her heart broken. Something deep within Astrid, maybe it was woman's intuition, knew that there was something distinctly not right about this. It wasn't an ordinary breakup, and Brandine's disappearance certainly wasn't going to make the problem go away. It was as she struggled to yank her axe out of a particularly stubborn tree that Astrid caught sight of a dragon flying far above. She watched the dragon circle a bit, certain that it was familiar, when its rider leaped off and plunged downward. The dragon, a monstrous nightmare by the look of it, shot down next to its rider, who definitely wasn't wearing a flight suit. Astrid's stomach clenched. This felt like an exceedingly bad idea, especially when the rider began to rapidly approach the ground without mounting their dragon again. "What are you?" Astrid muttered, daily hoping that she wasn't about to witness a tragedy, and wishing Stormfly weren't off hunting somewhere. Then the rider came into plain view. It was a woman with a long, blonde braid. Oh my gods! Her axe forgotten, Astrid bolted toward the trees where Adriana was about to land if she didn't mount Lily again soon. It was only just as she got to a clearing that she saw her daughter flying away less than 50 feet from the ground. A few more seconds and there wouldn't be a second haddock there. First Hiccup, now Adri. Astrid muttered savagely to herself as she stomped toward the village. Dumb enough that he does it with that stupid suit. She found her husband nearby, chatting with Horst. Tact not being her strong suit, she marched over and grabbed his arm. "I need to talk to you." "Okay," Hiccup managed to say before she yanked him nearer to the woods. "What is it?" "I just saw our daughter free falling." Astrid gestured toward the sky. "Without a flight suit?" Hiccup shrugged. "She's been flying since she was 10. I think she knows what she's doing." Are you even listening to yourself?" Astrid sputtered, surprised by his callousness. "She's in serious danger. I free fell plenty before I made my suit. I'm sure she's skilled enough not to get herself killed." Astrid gaped at him. "Why am I the one worried about this when you're usually the one who panics?" Hiccup breathed a laugh, which made Astrid's jaw clench in irritation. "It's not that, I just think she needs to cope with what happened any way she feels is best, short of actually hurting someone. She could hurt herself. I'll talk to her about it this evening," Hiccup said, his arms up in a placating gesture. "Okay. I'm sure there are a few safety measures we could instill before she gets her own flight suit. I'd feel better if she didn't do this until she has her own." Astrid's eyes darted upward just in time to see her daughter zooming high above the village. Hiccup glanced up and waved. Adriana apparently didn't see this gesture, but he didn't seem to mind. "I will take care of this. To be honest, free falling can be a bit addicting. But it's also safe if you're paying attention to what you're doing." At Astrid's glare, he faltered slightly. "I'll let her know she needs a flight suit." "All right. Okay. Whatever. Well, I've got stuff to do. See you." Astrid walked away without another word, leaving her bewildered husband staring after her. In the next few hours, Astrid tried to take to heart what Hiccup had told her. But she couldn't help but feel deeply uneasy. And if she had to be the one who worried for her child's safety this time, so be it. After a long day at the forge, Finn liked a bit of time alone. Extroverted as he was, interacting with Gobber and various customers all day still wore him out quite a bit. It was as he was deciding to have dinner alone tonight when he caught sight of his sister curled up on the couch with her nose in a book. "Oh. Hi," he said awkwardly. He wasn't expecting company. "I thought you were working." "Cancelled. Kari isn't feeling well this evening, so her dad decided to stay home with her." "Okay," Finn said, shrugging. "I'm going to make some stew. You want any?" Adriana looked up at him. "That sounds good. If you don't mind making extra. You should know by now that I am entrenched enough in this unmanly hobby to be willing to make extra stew for you." "Look at you, using big words," Adriana quipped. "I see my vocabulary is finally rubbing off on you." Finn stuck out his tongue at her before walking over to the kitchen. Just as he passed Adriana, he caught sight of something on her neck. His eyebrows furrowed and he stopped walking. "What's that?" he asked, leaning forward to inspect a mark on her neck. Adriana tried to put her hand on her neck, but Finn pushed it out of the way. "Is that a bruise?" "It's nothing." Adriana put her book down and got off the couch. "Don't worry about it. It's in the shape of a thumb." Finn crossed his arms. "As is the one on your wrist that I noticed yesterday." Adriana was momentarily speechless. She averted his gaze, instead looking at her wrist. It's not a big deal. I'm fine." "Did Brandine leave those bruises?" Finn asked, his voice more timid than he'd intended. He's gone, it doesn't matter." "Did he leave them?" Finn repeated, his voice much stronger. Adriana didn't respond. She instead looked down at her feet. Finn felt his blood curdle. "I'm going to kill him." Adriana shook her head. "No. Don't. You'll just make it worse." "For who?" "For you. You're the heir and it wouldn't look good if you pounded the guy who hurt you into the ground like a pancake." Adriana's mouth quirked into a tiny smile. "Pretty much." Finn crossed his arms tightly. "This isn't about me. He never should have touched you, let alone hurt you. What was going on that he ever left a mark, especially on your neck?" Adriana didn't respond, instead keeping her eyes fixed on her feet. "You shouldn't be defending him. Hey, look at me." Finn sauntered over so that he stood directly in front of her. He waited for her to look up at him to continue. "I know more than anyone that abuse makes you do crazy things. And it always matters." Adriana flinched at the word. Finn didn't like speaking it either. Gods knew he hated going into detail about his time as a slave, but it had to be said. Adriana swallowed, rubbing her bare arms. "You think he was abusive?" "I don't know for sure, but I know when something's wrong with you." "What happened? Other than the feud between him and Eric, and him cheating on me with Donna?" Adriana asked bitterly. Finn sighed. "If I'd known, I'd have knocked his teeth out. I worked with him every day, I should have noticed something." "Well, he was a good liar." Adriana muttered. "That doesn't matter. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't right. He's a big guy, he could really hurt." Finn stopped suddenly, his heart performing a horrible sort of belly flop against his ribs. "Did he do anything else?" "No. Don't lie, Anna. It doesn't matter what he did because he's gone. I drove him off myself." Adriana blurted out, looking angry for the first time since they had started talking. Finn slowly blinked. "How'd that happen?" "That's why there was blood on my sleeve. I took a dagger with me to tell him to leave. He fought back. That's what happened," Adriana said firmly. "Did you stab him?" "No." Adriana bit her lip for a moment. "I slashed his eye. There was a lot of blood, some of it got on my sleeve. And the floor of the house," Finn said, realization dawning on him. "I guess." "Why, did you go over there?" Adriana looked slightly nervous. No. Mom and Dad did, and they said there was blood. Signs of a struggle. You did that. Finn couldn't decide whether he was proud or horrified that his 5'3" sister had single-handedly driven off a guy that size. Yes. I told him to go and he fought back and I cut him and he left. That's what happened, okay. Adriana said, her voice trembling. Just, please don't tell Mom and Dad about this. I just want it to be over. I don't ever want to think about him again, and if they fuss over me, it's all going to come back up. Finn held up his hands in surrender. Okay. I'm not going to go blab. I mean, if they ask, I'm not going to lie. Adriana frowned. Finn. Let me finish, Finn interrupted. If they ask, I'm not going to lie, but I will also tell them that you don't want to be heckled. Assuming they listen to you. If I don't want to be heckled about slavery, then it shouldn't be any different for you. Adriana looked up at him in surprise. You seem to bring that up a lot lately. Finn shrugged. Just because I don't want to talk about it doesn't mean I don't think about it's great deal. Adriana hummed in agreement. I can understand that. Look at us, seeing eye to eye. Finn smirked, turning into the kitchen. You'd almost think we were twins. Ha ha. Adriana drawled, plopping into a chair. Finn cheerily pulled pots and pans out of the cupboards and began making their stew. He felt more relaxed now that he knew the story. Everything made sense now. But because his back was turned, he didn't see his sister slump in defeat with a guilty frown plastered to her face. Chapter 10, Getting Back to Normal. Chapter text. When Inga arrived at work for her usual allotted morning shift, she had an expected Mara to thrust a large basket of medical supplies into her arms and point a stiff finger out the door. Maggie has the flu. Can you refill the medical supplies in the academy for her? Inga nodded firmly. She turned and marched out the door, pulling it closed with her ankle as she went. Just before the door closed, she thought she heard raucous laughter coming from Cliff's corner of the hut. Good, that meant he could go home soon and stop ruining her days with painfully cheesy jokes. The Jorgensen girl marched through the streets purposefully, her head held high as she went. She gave a warm smile to everyone she came across, thinking about her work schedule as she went. A few streets away from Mara's, she was delighted to be joined by her changeling, Misty. Hey girl. Inga grinned. Care to give me a ride to the academy? Her changeling grinned toothily as if to say of course. She crouched for the teenager to slide into her saddle before they took off. Inga sighed in relief, thankful they had dragons. It saved so much time and energy from walking across the entire village. She couldn't imagine a time where dragons were enemies, born from a blood feud centuries old. She gave her dragon an affectionate scratch as the academy loomed into view. Misty hummed appreciatively and dove toward the entrance. Thanks, Misty. Inga slid to the ground and walked into the stone tunnel that led inside, her dragon on her heels. She heard the clashing of metal against metal and yelling. She stood in the large doorway, the iron gate looming above her head. Her eyes widened in surprise at the sight before her. Fearless Finn ducked from an oncoming sword and parried a blow from his other side. Thorin and Evan circled him, a grin present on the former's face and a scowl on the other's. Evan pitched a yell and lunged forward. Finn spun out of reach and blocked an oncoming blow from Thorin, who'd crept up on him from behind. Evan kicked the back of Finn's knee, forcing him to crumple beneath Thorin's sword. Finn slid his blade across Thorin's in a swift diagonal motion and swung it toward Evan, who leapt back to avoid the swing. Finn used his momentum to roll backwards and pop back onto his feet. The boys continued to spar around the academy, a few adults watching on with critical expressions. Who exactly they were critiquing Inga wasn't sure, but all three boys seemed to know what they were doing. She was impressed anyway. Inga winced when Finn smacked the butt of his sword into Thorin's nose. The dark-haired boy went down, nose streaming with blood. Evan and Finn's swords flashed, Evan backing the air further into the arena. Finally, a gradual look of irritation overtook Finn's face. Throwing up his sword, Finn blocked Evan's sword overhead and shoved it to one side. Evan noticed his error too late. Finn came forward in a single fast movement and smacked his forehead against Evan's. When Evan hit the ground hard, Inga realized her eyes were wide as saucers. She knew Finn had a talent for hand-to-hand combat, but wow. Good work. Astrid strode into the center of the academy. But we have a lot of work to do. Thorin, you're too slow. Evan, your right side is weak, put some muscle into it. Finn. Inga wished she could see his face, but unfortunately his back was to her. Astrid pondered her words. Don't get cocky. Boys, ice your faces. Thorin and Evan dragged themselves off the cobblestones with groans. Finn turned to the side, sheathing his sword, and quite suddenly looked toward her. Inga gave a startled, rather undignified eep before scuttling off to the medical area. As she stuffed rolls of cloth and ointments into the box, Inga fumed to herself. She simply couldn't understand why she was acting so weird all of a sudden. She'd always disliked Finn from the start. But it seemed since their little encounter in the woods a while back had sparked a new fire in her soul and mind that she just couldn't destroy. Inga Jorgensen prided herself in honesty and loyalty and a no-nonsense attitude. But she couldn't lie to herself anymore. She liked fearless Finn Haddock. With a groan of annoyance, Inga turned a glare over her shoulder. There he was across the academy, standing tall in his protective armor. The ends of his red hair were a shade darker from sweat, a few strands plastered to his forehead. He laughed at something one of the other boys said. He even went so far as to bite his bottom lip, which for some strange reason made her insides turn to jelly. When he took a long swig of water from a cup, she couldn't help but think that he was perhaps the most gorgeous boy she'd ever met. Inga blinked and slapped herself, turning back towards the medical supplies. This was ridiculous. It wasn't fair. He shouldn't be allowed to have this effect on her. Especially when such a thing could never be reciprocated. Finn would never come to like her. Their age difference alone made that difficult. To him, she was still just a little kid, she was sure of it. Sure, they teased each other relentlessly and bickered like an old married couple, but that didn't mean they had that much in common. She wasn't that concerned about boys anyway, who was she kidding? She had enough to worry about from working at the healers and trying to keep herself healthy, even help out at home when she could. At 13, the last thing she needed to worry about was boys. Especially that one. Inga's gaze flitted back to Finn when he laughed out loud. Her eyes slid to his chest. The fact that she now knew just how toned his body was certainly did not help things. While she was staring and thinking, she barely noticed Thorin smirk from under the cloth holding his nose and mumble something to the other boys. Finn and Evan turned toward her and they too smirked. That's when Inga realized they'd just caught her staring. Twisting once again back to her work, her heart pounding in her chest, she set to haphazardly throwing items into the box. Surely this job didn't take very long anyway. Mara would be wondering where she was and what was taking so long. She couldn't tell her what had delayed her. Inga Jorgensen was focused and on time and... Hey! Inga jumped, nearly dropping a box of cloths. Her eyes landed on Finn, who'd just materialized beside her without her notice or permission. She quickly turned a look over her shoulder, which showed -1 fearless Finn by Thorin and Evan, whose relentless snickering she ignored. She turned back toward Finn, ignoring his wild smirk, and raised her chin. Gods, he was even more gorgeous up close. Inga. Focus. Hello Finn. Inga said in a clipped tone. Finn leaned against the stone wall. How's your day going? Her day. Why was he asking how her day was going? It's not like he thought about her outside of the few times a week they maybe ran into each other, so why would he care how her day was going? Instead of voicing these thoughts, she replied, Good. Yours. Finn watched her fumble with more supplies. Fine. Just stocking things up. Yup. While the conversation was mainly small talk, Inga was freaking out inside. Why did he come all the way across the arena to talk to her? Did the boys put him up to it? Did he feel bad because she was by herself? Need any help with that? Inga frowned at him. Why? Finn shrugged. You're shaking. I'm not shaking. Inga pronounced perhaps a little too loudly. You're nervous. PFT, Inga closed the drawers to the medical box. What do I have to be nervous about? It's just. Just what? Finn asked, shoving his hands into his pockets. He looked like he was feigning innocence. Inga narrowed her eyes, staring him down. Just you. Her heart clung to her boots. She'd meant it to sound cold, it came out a lot softer and warmer than she meant. And now he was smirking. She felt heat rise to her face. She couldn't decide if she wanted to stare into his icy blue eyes forever or look away. Finn blinked and looked away, smirk evaporating. "Anyway, can I ask you a favor?" "A favor?" Inga gulped, but feigned nonchalance. "Like what?" What could he need from her? She didn't have much to offer him. Pass a message from parent to parent. No, the chief wouldn't use his son to pass a message to her father who was on the council. That wouldn't make sense. Maybe he was wondering about Cliff. Well, that wouldn't be a favor, he'd just ask. A small, teensy-weensy part of her freaked out and wondered if he wanted to meet sometime, like that one time in the woods. "Could you look at Thorin's nose? I think I might have broken it." Inga deflated. "Oh. Sure." Finn's brow furrowed. "You okay?" Inga gave him a resolute yup, turned on her heel and marched toward the other boys. Finn seemed to sense the sudden shift in her mood because he merely followed her and didn't press the issue. Stupid boy and his stupid words and stupid face that made her turn to go and then ask stupid questions to fix stupid things that were his stupid problem anyway. Stupid boy. Stupid feelings. Stupid. Ow. Thorin yelped. "Oh." Inga winced, shaking her hands in front of the teen apologetically. "Sorry." She gingerly tilted Thorin's face upward so she could inspect it better. Carefully she inspected the bridge of his nose, which was swollen and turning purple and blue. "It might just be a sprain, but if you want the best opinion I'd go to Mara's. Just ice it when you get home. Should at least bring the swelling down." Thanks Doc." Thorin moaned nasally and leaned back against the wall. He glared up at Finn through heavy eyelids. "Why are you so vicious?" Finn held up his palms. "Sorry. Don't put your face in front of my sword. So competitive." Thorin moaned, a hand hovering over his face. He clearly wanted to hold his nose but didn't for fear of making it bleed again. "That's what happens when you're born a haddock." Finn shrugged. "The love of competition is in the blood. Please, we Jorgensens have more competitive spirit than you." Inga smirked. "And yet who won the last Thorfist games?" Finn shrugged his eyebrows. Inga turned and punched his arm, which barely moved. "I loathe you." She tried not to think about the feel of his strong bicep under her fist. Finn smirked, crossing his arms and leaning against the stone wall. "Now you love me." Heart pounding, Inga sculled. "No." "Yup." "Nope." "Yup." "No, I don't, so shut your stupid face." Finn breathed a laugh and looked away. Evan snorted from a nearby stool. Thorin wore a triumphant smirk on his face. Inga couldn't believe how he could always find something to laugh about concerning her when she wasn't even doing anything. Did he exist to mock her? Oh, that was the god's curse, make her birth happen almost 4 years after him so there'd be a humongous age gap, but make him totally and irrevocably amazing in every way so she couldn't just not have him, she'd have to suffer day in and day out by watching. The unattainable boy fearless Finn and the forever alone Inga Jorgensen, destined to never be together forever. Oh, for the love of this was ridiculous. Here she was standing around moaning and griping inside over a boy. This was unacceptable behavior. "Oh haddock." Inga growled and snatched Thorin by the arm. "Ow. Oh shut up and come on. Where are you taking me?" Thorin asked in a whiny, nasally voice. "The healers." Dummy Inga pulled him up and ushered him toward the entrance. She just needed to get out of here before she embarrassed herself further. "Take care of my bro, sweetheart." Inga whirled around with stormy blue eyes. "Don't call me sweetheart." Finn grinned. "Whatever you say, beauty." Eric was bored out of his mind. He hadn't felt like going to dinner and listening to Finn, Thorin, and Evan talking about their fighting techniques one more time, nor did he much feel like getting punched on the shoulder if he as much as dared sit down next to Inga and her friends. As he began to think about making himself some soup, a loud bang shook the house and he nearly fell out of his chair. He whipped around to find the door dangerously close to detaching from its hinges and a figure standing in the middle. I have arrived, announced Cliff, arms outstretched. Eric leaped to his feet and nearly tackled him in a hug. Cliff began to laugh openly. I should get poisoned more often. Cliff chirped when Eric let him go, massaging his ribs but smiling from ear to ear. Don't, said Eric, clapping his friend on the back. Let's just pretend this didn't happen. Done and done. Cliff eyed the floor. You didn't pick up your sock. Eric glanced over at the sock on the ground. Would you be okay with it if it was abstract art? Cliff narrowed his eyes. No. And why didn't you come to see me? You were only out for 2 days. Eric rolled his eyes. And I did. You were sleeping and I didn't want to wake you up or Inga would have let me have it. Is it true you and Taryn were making a racket? It is undeniably true. Cliff waggled his eyebrows. But my absence should not excuse you and your poor cleaning habits. Meh. Eric stuck his tongue out at Cliff before picking up his sock. There. Happy. Almost. Cliff crossed his arms. Now toss it in your room. What if I just hold it? Eric tossed the sock in the air and caught it. No. Throw it in your room. Cliff's face reddened slightly. I really wouldn't have pegged you as a neat freak. I'm not a neat freak, I just don't like socks all over the room. Eric looked around. All over the room. Only sock I see is in my hand. Well, I still don't like socks in the living room. Socks belong in the bedroom. Or the clothes line. Not the floor. And dishes belong in the cupboards and dirt belongs outside. Face it, buddy. You're a neat freak. No, I'm. Catch. Cliff nearly dived out of the way of Eric's sock when he threw it. Eric laughed uproariously. Really though, I've missed you. Life's been boring without you, said Eric, jogging over and picking his sock up off the floor. I'll take care of this right now. He threw it into his room and closed the door so Cliff wouldn't have to look at it. Then the boys sat down and Eric asked Cliff to regale him in the adventures at the Healers. Most of the time, Eric didn't mind listening to Cliff's chatter, even if it was annoying. But today, he hung on to every word. He added his own thoughts, which only seemed to inspire Cliff to talk even more. The atmosphere in that little house was energetic and cheerful for the first time in weeks. With all the drama Eric had gone through and with Cliff gone for days, a bit of happiness was sorely needed. They were surprised to hear a knock at the door a few minutes later. Adriana was waiting outside, looking somewhat apprehensive. When Cliff leaped from his seat and hugged her, she hugged back, but Eric could see an almost guilty expression on her face. Mind if I borrow Eric for a sec? She asked when Cliff relinquished her. Be sure to bring him back in one piece, he said cheerfully. Adriana averted her eyes when Eric turned back to look at her. For a moment, he wondered if she was going to cry. They walked out the door and shut it behind them. What's up? He asked, genuinely concerned. Brandine's gone. Adriana mumbled. Eric felt slightly uncomfortable. I know. Hiccup told me. Adriana nodded. She still wouldn't meet his gaze. Finally, she took a deep, shuddering breath. I'm sorry I said what I said, she told him. Brandine wanted me to cut ties with you, but I never wanted to. Eric felt a surge of anger. He knew it. He knew Brandine had told her not to talk to him. Her behavior had been so strange, it couldn't have come from her. Trying to arrange his features into a far less angry expression, he chanced a step forward. It's okay. He's a big guy. Intimidating. Or, at least, well, I hope that's not why you said all that. Adriana bit her lip, staring blankly into the distance. Eric knew this to mean that she was either thinking hard or not thinking at all. He wasn't sure which one it was. Finally, she audibly swallowed. He wasn't a very good boyfriend, she said in a choked sort of voice. I learned that a bit too late. Eric smiled at her in what he hoped was an understanding way. He couldn't help but notice that her eyes darted down to his dimples for a split second. He'd always known she liked them. Simaya, he said at last, figuring that she didn't know what to say next. He extended his arms. She didn't flinch or turn away, instead she hugged him tightly, as if deeply relieved that he didn't hate her. I'm sorry, she repeated, sounding close to tears now. It's fine. Forget about it. Eric muttered into her ear. I was stupid too. We've both got plenty to apologize for. Gods, her hair was soft. She was wearing it down today, just as she had the day they'd kissed. He resisted the urge to run his fingers through it. Instead, he took a deep breath through his nose. She'd washed it recently. Today or yesterday. It smelled like a kind of flower he couldn't quite place. It was probably lilac, considering her love of the color. He could breathe it in all day. When they finally broke apart, Adriana smiled at last. I'm really relieved, she admitted. I thought you'd hate me. We've gotten into worse fights, Annie. Eric said softly. I'm not mad. To be honest, I'm relieved too. I missed you. Even if it was just a few days. Yeah. So, we're cool? Adriana asked timidly. Absolutely. Although. Eric thought about how to phrase what he was about to say. I think we should talk about it. What happened? If that's okay. Adriana stiffened slightly. I think I want some time to deal with it on my own. With all this. I mean, she took a deep breath. I know that kiss kind of made us both feel some things. I'm not denying that. But after all this, after everything that's happened, I don't want to think about that right now. I just want some time. Okay. Eric dearly wanted to raise an objection, but he held his tongue. She'd just broken up with her boyfriend of over a year. Any girl would want time to sort through her feelings after that. He tried to imagine how he would feel if the situation had been reversed, if Adriana wanted to talk about their mutual feelings after he'd broken up with Taryn. He wouldn't have been too keen on that either. I'm always here when you need to talk, he said, trying to give her a friendly smile that didn't come off as pitying. I really appreciate that. Adriana said through a deep breath. But now isn't the time. I should probably let you get back to Cliff. Eric didn't want to let her go. Something seemed so incredibly wrong about how she was acting, but she was right. These things took time. Expecting her to confess her secrets to him now, especially after everything they had gone through, was foolhardy. He was just relieved that she wasn't angry at him for blabbing about their kiss to the village. He felt a prickle of guilt at the thought. You'll be okay, he asked as she turned to walk away. Yeah. I'll be fine. Adriana said, shrugging. If Eric had looked at her a split second longer, he would have caught it. Her mouth turning downward ever so slightly, eyebrows pinching together. He would have known that she had lied to him about being fine. But he didn't. An evening flight was enough to make Hiccup feel completely relaxed. Toothless had been pleased that he had the extra time today, so the sun had already set before they landed in town. It was the first time in several weeks that they'd had this much extra time. Hiccup had been rushing around, dealing with altercations and harvest meetings and talking to Adriana about her free-falling. He felt at least somewhat surprised at how easily she had been convinced to stop until she had the proper equipment. She hadn't argued at all. Life on Berk was finally getting back to normal in Brandine's absence. Gobber had started training Vidar Jorgensen as a second apprentice, and Finn seemed to like the boy's company. Adriana had been moody for sure, eating less and snapping at people, but Hiccup was convinced she was still dealing with her breakup. It wasn't until he handed from his flight that Adriana's emotional state came into question again. As he walked through the village, several Burkians waved to them and engaged them in conversation. Hiccup was just thinking about heading home and having a snack when he nearly ran into Matilda. Oh, I'm sorry, he said, helping her pick up the books she had dropped. It's fine. Matilda gathered her things and faced him, her brow furrowed slightly. Actually, I have a bit of a concern, if you have a minute. I've got time. What's on your mind? Matilda took a deep breath, apparently thinking about how best to phrase what she was about to say. It's Adriana. She's acting strange. Or she was today. Strange how? Hiccup asked. She hardly ever comes in anymore, but today, she showed up just as I was about to leave. Didn't even say hello, just ran in the back room and said she'd close the place when she was done. Matilda sighed. I know she's going through a lot, but still, that seemed off. I'm sure it's nothing, but I wanted to let you know. Hiccup glanced over in the direction of the library, where only one of the windows was illuminated. I'll go see what's up. Thanks. Good night. Matilda nodded to him. Night. Hiccup and Toothless trotted over to the library seconds later, the former deep in thought. Adriana had been acting unusually for days, but he hadn't thought much of it. He and Astrid had agreed to keep their distance to prevent her from shutting them out completely. They had thought that surely she would be okay if she had some time to deal with what happened. He opened the door to the library and stepped in, Toothless at his heels. It was very dark. He didn't like his daughter being alone in the dark building where anyone could come in and do gods knew what to her. But now was not the time for lectures. He quickly found the back door and pushed it open. The door immediately hit a small pile of books. Hiccup looked down and saw books littering the floor, most of them lying open on the ground as if they'd been thrown there. An overturned bookshelf was to the left, and in front of it was his daughter, standing rigidly with her back to him. Matilda, I said I'd. Adriana snapped as she whipped around. Upon facing Hiccup, her mouth dropped open in shock. Oh. Hiccup edged his way in, leaving the door open so Toothless could see, but silently instructing him to stay out of the smaller space. The dragon plopped to the ground with his head resting on his paws, concern for Adriana etched in his features. Hiccup was at a loss for words. Finn was the sort of person who threw things when upset, but Adriana never did. At least not often enough to be noteworthy. Everything okay? Adriana pursed her lips. Smashing. I can see that, said Hiccup with a small chuckle. Adriana didn't laugh. After a long pause in which neither of them seemed to have anything to say, Hiccup bent down and began picking up several of the books. He had no idea what could have upset her. A goofy comic book? No, she loved silly things like that. Maybe this book on common medical ailments. Well, if they were common, it wasn't like she was dying. Perhaps this book on knitting patterns. Heavens no, she didn't have the patience for knitting. He looked up to find Adriana's shoulders slumped, her arms crossed in front of her chest as if she wanted to shrink until she disappeared. What's the matter? He finally asked, righting the overturned shelf and returning the books to it. Adriana's frown deepened. Nothing. Addie. Nothing, she snapped, turning so he couldn't see her face. Hiccup straightened up, leaving the stack of books he'd collected on top of the shelf. You know that's not true. Finn is the one who breaks things when he's upset. And he lashes out at just about everyone. But I've never heard from Matilda that you've ever lashed out at her once. Adriana didn't respond, but he could see her jaw clench. So what's wrong? Adriana shook her head, her hand now covering her eyes like she was about to cry. Hiccup felt conflicted. Her positioning implied that she certainly didn't want to be touched, but at the same time, if she was this upset, wasn't there something he could do? Something he should do? Addie, really, what is it? Hiccup asked again, this time more softly. I hate boys, she blurted out so suddenly, Hiccup jumped. Yeah, said Hiccup with a small, wistful smile. They're the absolute worst. He was half expecting a sarcastic comeback. He certainly wouldn't have let the opportunity go to waste, and his daughter could be very snooky when she felt like it. But a few seconds of dead silence later, he knew she was far too upset to make a joke. Hiccup didn't know much about breakups. He knew how painful it could be to see a relationship crumble. His near divorce 10 years ago had given him that lesson. But that was a different situation. He and Astrid had worked out their problems. Adriana would never work them out with Brandine, that much he knew. She had descended into deep depression in the last few days. It wasn't just her constant exhaustion and refusal of meals that concerned him, it was her sudden change from near recovery. Did she just miss Brandine now? He wished she would tell him, like she would have when she was small. He made a decision in an instant as her shoulders slowly hunched over even more. Walking over to where she was standing, he gently touched her shoulder. Addie, he murmured, come here. He had almost expected her to refuse, and he wouldn't have blamed her if she had. Instead, she turned around and immediately put her arms around him, clinging to him as if this was their final goodbye. It will be okay, he whispered to her, holding her tightly. Things will get better. He ruined everything, she whimpered, burying her face in his neck. Not everything. Hiccup smoothed her long hair in the middle of her back, at a loss for what to say. He knew that having a relationship end so suddenly had to be devastating, especially for someone her age. He couldn't imagine what she was going through. But he knew one thing for sure. He didn't ruin you. He didn't know whether it was in response to his words, but she clung to him tighter. Ordinarily he loved being hugged by either of his children. But this one felt more like the one he'd given her when he was on his way to Braun for his duel with Dager. They didn't know if they would ever see each other again. Adriana had held him tightly then, sobbing into his shoulder. She wasn't crying this time, but he wondered if she was holding herself back. Whatever the reason, she was clearly devastated about something. "I'm sorry," Hiccup said softly. "Breakups aren't easy. You and Mom got lucky." Adriana swallowed thickly. Still, it was never easy. No relationship is. They broke apart and he kissed her forehead. "You just need a bit of time to heal." His daughter nodded but didn't quite meet his eye. "I'm sorry. I'll clean up." Hiccup had been so focused on Adriana that he had forgotten that the room was still a wreck. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll take care of it. You should head home." He patted her back. "It's dark outside, so take Toothless with you." "I'll be back." Adriana nodded and walked toward the door. "I don't know if this will make you feel better, Addie, but if I ever see him again, I will punch his face in. He deserves worse," Adriana said darkly before disappearing into the night, Toothless at her side. Chapter 11, Unexpected Complications. Chapter text. 17. That was the first thing that had popped into Finn's head when he woke up on his birthday. And it was still on his mind when he ate a good breakfast of bacon and eggs and walked to his job with his head held high. It didn't take him long to notice a shift in the attention he received. He got many happy birthdays as he strolled through town on the way to work, but the way others looked at him as if he was suddenly more important, it all made him a tiny bit uncomfortable. He decided to talk to Gobber about this on his lunch break once Vidar had gone off to find his twin. "Not going to meet your admirers?" Gobber asked when he noticed Finn standing there, his lunch bag in his hands and his brow furrowed slightly. I will," said Finn with a little shrug. "I just wanted to ask you something." "All right." Gobber put down the sword he was attempting to repair and seated himself on a stool. "Did my dad have any reservations about becoming chief when he turned 17? Finn asked, drawing up another stool to sit down. Gobber looked thoughtful for a moment. He didn't think too much about it, to be honest. "Too busy snogging your mother in this very back room and thinking I didn't know what he was doing. Yeah, if we could maybe not talk about my parents making out, that'd be great," Finn said with a grimace. "Oh, I could tell you a few stories about your parents that would make your hair stand on end. Not that it needs it." Gobber nudged Finn's shoulder with the boulder in place of his left hand. "But to answer your question, he wasn't too fussed about it at your age. And you shouldn't be either. Barring any serious accidents, you've got a little ways to go before you take over. I don't think Hiccup's going to hand you your birthright tonight at your party. In fact, I know he's not." "Yeah, but you just brought up my next point. If my dad dropped dead tomorrow, the entire village would go to me. I know I'm not ready for it." Finn scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "And I don't think the village trusts me after the whole gang debacle." "You'd be surprised. I think your efforts to redeem yourself have done more than you think." Gobber gave Finn an understanding sort of smile. "But I get what you're trying to ask. And no, you're not ready for it." But neither was Hiccup. And neither was Stoic. Pop Stoic wasn't ready to be chief. Finn's memories of his grandfather were a bit fuzzy, but the man certainly exuded confidence in his job. "That sounds a bit out of character. And you were born decades after he started." "Course he was confident by then. And your dad is now. So will you once you get the hang of things," Gobber said, pointing his boulder attachment at Finn. "You've got time, Finn. Don't stress yourself out before you started. It's your birthday." "Yeah. I know." Finn smiled. "It's still a lot of pressure and now it's pretty real," he sighed. I miss Benin. He'd be proud of you. Gobber assured him. You think? I don't think. I know. Gobber tapped his helmet with his boulder. Now get out of here before your lunch break ends. I'm pretty sure your friends are missing you. I can't stick around and hang out with my favorite old-timer. Finn chortled as he stood up. Well, you could. Gobber shrugged. I just thought you'd want to spend more time with people your age. Oh, but I wanted to hear your tales about hunting dinosaurs in your youth. I'm still your elder and I can still smack you if you get out of line. Gobber shouted, but his lips twitched in an almost smile. Finn laughed. All right, don't get your skivvies in a twist. See you in a bit. And thanks for listening, I guess. Gobber waved as Finn left the hot forge to join the other teenagers outside. Zap, who had been snoozing outside of the forge for the last few hours, hopped to her feet and ran forward to lick his face. Oh, Zappy. Finn put his hands up to shield himself from the slobber. I missed you too, princess. Ro-oru-oru. Zap half growled in the back of her throat. Yes, I know, being away from you for as much as 5 seconds is too. Oh baby, what did they do to you? Finn cooed, now noticing a bright pink party hat atop his precious dragon's head. I made her festive. Cliff chirped before rushing forward and tackling Finn to the ground. And now you're getting your birthday punches. Let me go. Finn yelped, trying to get out from underneath the skinnier boy. Cliff punched his shoulder. That's one. Eric, help. Eric stood above the boys, his arms crossed and an amused smirk on his face. Nah, I'd rather see how this plays out. Sadist. Finn growled as Cliff punched him for the 4th time. It's tradition, Finrony. Cliff punched him a 5th time. All birthday boys get punches. Oh, does this mean you're not going to punch my twin? Nah, Eric's going to kiss her. Eric opened his mouth to retaliate but was swiftly interrupted by Finn shaking Cliff off after his 10th punch and running away as fast as he could. Cliff wasted no time in pursuing him. I only got 7 more to go. Cliff shouted as Finn bolted toward the trees. Come back and let me honor this tradition. Nope. Finn called over his shoulder. Zap, who seemed to enjoy the spectacle before her, began chasing the boys. Apparently her rider being knocked to the ground and punched didn't warrant her protection. Or perhaps she knew Cliff too well to think he was going to cause any serious damage. So absorbed in running away from Cliff as Finn was, he didn't notice Inga until he ran headlong into her, nearly knocking her over. Cliff skidded to a halt, watching as the 2 teenagers regained their footing. I think I'll leave you 2 alone. I still owe you 7 punches, he said gleefully before walking away, a happy bounce in his step. Clumsy oaf. Inga said almost affectionately as she picked up the small tin she was carrying. Watch where you're going next time, Haddock. Yeah, because it's easy to watch where you're going and run away from an assailant at the same time. Finn said sarcastically. Maybe you should watch where you're going. Or maybe you should accept your punishment for aging a year. Inga snipped with a grin. Actually, I was looking for you. I made you these. She shoved the tin into Finn's hands. Uh-oh. What did you do? Finn handled the tin as if it was a bomb about to go off. Don't be stupid, they're just cookies. Poisoning me on my own birthday. Really? You hate me that much? Finn smirked at the look of sheer annoyance on Inga's face. I will smack you, she said through gritted teeth. Finn held up his hands in mock surrender. Oh no. That's the worst possible thing that could ever happen to me. He held his hands in front of his face. Please don't slap me, Inga, I'm begging you. To her credit, Inga didn't slap him. Instead, she punched him in the gut. Finn laughed, though he had to admit that the place she'd punched did smart a bit. She was a lot stronger than she looked. You've maimed me, he whined dramatically. How could you? Stop your bellyaching and just try a cookie. Inga crossed her arms in a way that reminded Finn of his mother. A future chief has to be able to recognize assassination attempts, you know. You're being way too obvious. Finn laughed at the scowl that crossed her face. Which is why I doubt this is an assassination attempt. I give you more credit. Oh, I'm so flattered. Inga said sarcastically. Finn opened the tin with the air of someone trying to avoid a sleeping dragon in the dark. Inga cleared her throat impatiently. He extracted a cookie and took a small nibble. To his great surprise, it was pretty good. "Is this chocolate and peanuts?" he asked as he chewed. "Yep." "How did you know I liked peanuts?" Finn asked, taking a much bigger bite. "I never talk about it. I heard you complaining to Cliff that you barely ever get them cause Anna hates them," Inga said with a little shrug. "It's so stupid," Finn complained. "Make some cookies with nuts, some without." "Well, these cookies are all yours." Inga smiled proudly. "And now you have a good reason not to share them. You're the best, Inga. Even if I don't act like it." Finn winked at her and could have sworn that, for a split second, her knees had gone a bit weak. Her brow furrowed as if she was annoyed at herself for being obvious. "See you tonight. If I have to." Inga mock-sighed before turning on her heel and walking back into the woods, joining Misty, who had been sniffing at a tree root a few feet away. Finn watched her go with a mischievous grin. He wasn't stupid. He knew she was losing a fight with herself whenever she was around him, and he enjoyed watching the struggle. More than once, he'd caught her ogling him during training and even once in the woods. She wasn't the only girl who looked at him that way, but she was the only one who clearly was fighting these intrusive feelings. That was what Finn liked about Inga, when it came right down to it. He liked that she didn't only look at him as the heir of Burke. She obviously judged him on his own merits, which was why she was so angry at herself for having such a big crush. Finn had to admit that, of all the girls on Burke, she was the only one who could keep up with him and put him in his place. Sometimes she could be downright childish, but then other times, she would exhibit a maturity he wouldn't have expected. It was these moments that made him feel a bit guilty for how he felt. It wasn't only Inga fighting her feelings. Finn knew he didn't have it nearly as bad, but he couldn't help looking out of the forge window whenever she passed by. He loved bantering with her. He loved making her stomp her feet in frustration. It was the best kind of flirting. But the fact remained that she was only 13 years old and he was a big, beefy 17-year-old himself. Hardly age appropriate. Perhaps when she was 14, it might be a bit different. 13 seemed extremely young for a relationship. Finn suddenly shook his head. What was he thinking? Inga Jorgensen was completely out of his league anyway. She deserved better than a dumb guy who had once attempted to destroy as much of Burke's treasures as possible. She deserved someone who would have the time to take care of her should she suffer from any more seizures. Still, he had to admit that she knew him pretty well. Had she improved her recipe for him? Did she sit on the information about his love for peanuts in his cookies until his special day? It was maddening how difficult girls were to understand. Everyone always made fun of them and their friendship. He could hear the older folk whisper that it was just a matter of time, rather like they had when Adriana and Eric were young and playing together. He hadn't taken these whispers seriously. But now? Well, now he couldn't help but wonder if they knew something he didn't. The banners were hung, ridiculous party hats were distributed by Cliff, and a mound of presents sat at the far table in the great hall. The birthday party of the twin children of the chief was all ready to go. It didn't take long for the hall to fill up. Finn could be seen with a group of admirers within the first few seconds of his arrival. Adriana had sidled in and stuck to the walls, chatting with Eric and Taryn in the corner. Hiccup looked around in satisfaction. Truth be told, he loved birthdays. His own was so rare, it was quite special when he got to celebrate it on the actual day, but the twins' birthday was different. He had never really considered the term until he had witnessed the birth of his children. Since then, he could fully appreciate what this day really meant. It was a joyful day for certain. He could never forget Finn's scrunched up little face or Adriana sucking on her fist just after she had started breathing. He remembered Finn plunging his head into the cake on his first birthday, emerging with a huge smile and his face coated in blue frosting. Tiny Adriana on her third birthday, absolutely delighted by the butterflies he had painted on her wall. The twins getting their dragons on their 10th birthday. All of them stuck out in Hiccup's memory for one reason or another, and they gave him a reason to smile. Through the ups and downs, the twins were truly some of the best gifts he'd ever received. And now they were 17. The thought was truly horrifying. They had been so little not long ago. Looking at Finn laughing with his friends, Hiccup couldn't believe he had been able to fit his son in one hand. That his curvy daughter had once been a laughing toddler who listened to her bedtime stories with rapt attention. Had the gods sped up time? He wasn't ready for them to be adults yet. And yet he was confident. Finn had grown into a mature young man and Adriana into a compassionate young woman. They were fine, Hiccup thought. Sometimes, I think your head would come off if it weren't attached. Hiccup started slightly but relaxed when he spotted his grinning wife, her arm snaking around his waist. You're probably right, said Hiccup. I'd leave it in the clouds and Toothless would have to go looking for it. He'd find it. The couple laughed. Hiccup put his arm around Astrid's shoulders. Astrid paused a moment to collect her thoughts. I just can't believe they both somehow fit inside me at one point. It really is a miracle. Hiccup nodded. But look how far they've gotten. I'm not sure I'd want the baby days back. Astrid nudged Hiccup's side. Finn puked all over you once, do you remember? Never did get the smell out of my flight suit. Hiccup shook his head. Good thing I made this one. Then he gestured to the outfit he was wearing. Just slobber marks now. Astrid patted a spot on the chest. Well, that wasn't the twins. Hiccup narrowed his eyes at Toothless, who was now wearing a party hat as well. That was a giant lizard who doesn't listen. Can't really blame him. He just loves you. Astrid reached up and kissed Hiccup's cheek. And I think we should give the twins our gifts now. It's a little early. Yeah, but I don't want to wait that long. Astrid practically skipped over to the table with presents and whistled loudly so everyone would turn to look at her. We'll let you get back to your fun in a second. We just wanted to give the twins our sort of coming-of-age gifts. Finn sprinted over, his conversation with friends forgotten. Adriana approached a bit more cautiously, like she thought the gifts might explode. Since you're of age, we thought it was about time you got something really useful for some of your adult responsibilities. Helped me a lot, anyway. Hiccup clapped Finn on the back. Well, open it. All right, hold your dragons, Dad. Finn ripped open the paper and pulled out a folded leather thing. Whoa. When he had straightened it out, Finn was holding a flight suit in black with dark green accents. The suit had some thicker parts, which seemed to conceal armor. The legs have a material that doesn't conduct all of zaps. Hiccup gestured to the pants. So you won't get shocked again. Dad, this is, wow. Finn's blue eyes were wide with wonder as he turned the suit around in his hands. Oh, and Hiccup grabbed a smaller object off the table. Don't forget this. He handed Finn a mask, rather like his own. Finn beamed at him. Can I try this on now? Go for it. Hiccup clapped Finn on the back and Finn bolted toward a broom closet so he could change in private. And Addie, open yours. Adriana, who had been silently watching her brother with his new suit, now turned to her own gift. She opened the slightly smaller package to reveal yet another leather object. Is it? She raised it up so everyone could see. Oh, wow. Hiccup was really pleased about this particular gift. He had put it together in much less time than he had Finn's and it came out splendidly. The flight suit was also black, but with royal purple highlights as well. He had measured the Leah Smedley for this suit, since she and Adriana were roughly the same size, but made it adjustable just in case something was a bit snug or roomy. If his daughter was going to take after him and leap off her dragon in midair, at least she could fall with style. What do you think? Astrid asked as the audience murmured their approval of the flight suit. It's... thank you. Adriana didn't look as happy as her brother had, something Hiccup had not overlooked. But a split second later, she smiled and hugged him. You're welcome, Addie. Hiccup said, enthusiastically hugging her back. Do you want to try it on? In a bit. Adriana nodded. It's really beautiful, Dad. Well, you're beautiful. Hiccup kissed her forehead. So I couldn't let it look ridiculous like mine. I like the buckles. Adriana looked at them somewhat affectionately before placing the suit on the table. Thanks again, Daddy. Really. Hiccup was about to respond when Finn emerged from the closet, wearing his suit for the first time. Astrid had been right about the green, he thought, because it really did complement Finn's thick red hair. At 17, standing tall and decked out in leather, Hiccup couldn't help but be reminded of himself a little bit. Even the smirk on Finn's face was quite a bit like his own smirks at that age. "You look amazing." Astrid rushed forward to hug her son. "Ah, come on, Mom." Finn hugged her back but laughed. "Don't cry." "I'm not crying." Astrid smacked Finn's chest. "I'm just proud that my baby boy is a grown man and that he's so handsome now. I was afraid you'd get the worst of us both." "Oh." Hiccup chortled, sauntering over. "We have amazingly good looks, you and I. We got lucky." Astrid pinched Finn's cheek, prompting him to roll his eyes. "Both our kids are real lookers." "Yeah, they definitely." Hiccup turned to his daughter but she was gone. "Addie. She said she was going to the outhouse," said Tarin. "All right." Hiccup turned back to his son. As everyone gushed over how good Finn looked in his new suit, no one had noticed Adriana slipping out through the back. No one except a certain blonde who certainly wasn't interested in watching Finn show off. Eric felt a bit uneasy. It had been 15 minutes and Adriana still hadn't come back. So preoccupied was the crowd and even Hiccup and Astrid with Finn and his suit and all sorts of birthday wishes that no one else seemed to have noticed this fact. Gripped with a sudden concern, Eric excused himself and headed to the back of the hall, ignoring the calls of other teens as he went. The first thing Eric noticed was that the outhouse door was ajar. For a split second, he was afraid he would catch sight of something he shouldn't, but before he could react, he realized that the tiny outhouse was empty. So where was his best friend? Something told Eric to wander to the right and into the forest behind the hall. The sun shone through the branches of the trees, making a crisscross pattern against the ground. Eric kept his gaze low so that he wouldn't snag his prosthetic on a vine or tree root. As he walked through the woods, trying not to make too much noise, he finally heard whispers coming from a clearing just ahead of him. "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay." Eric crept toward the noise and took a moment to simply look at her. She was sitting on a log, her shoulders hunched and her hands in her hair. She continued to whisper her attempted assurances as Eric walked forward. "Annie." Adriana looked up at him with wide eyes. He'd half expected her to be crying, what with the ever-increasing panic in her whispers. For a moment, she stared at him as if she was trying to figure out if he was actually standing there or not. "What are you doing here?" she asked in an attempt to be nonchalant. "I just noticed you left," Eric replied with a warm smile. Rather than respond, Adriana averted his gaze and fixed it on the trees to her left. Eric's stomach began to knot uncomfortably. He had never seen her like this before, this unresponsive. Recently all of their conversations had been emotionally charged. But this reminded him of how he had acted the first few days after his father had died. And that made her behavior even more troubling. "Unless I'm crazy," Eric took a tentative step forward, "the birthday girl is supposed to be the star of the party." "No, that's Finn," Adriana mumbled. "He's always the life of the party. And I'm not." "Oh, come on. That's not true. Everyone knows your brother can be difficult." He let out a weak chuckle but she remained unresponsive. "You shouldn't be seen with me," Adriana said after a few tense seconds. "What? Why?" Eric asked, genuinely surprised. She didn't respond. "Annie, come on. Something's wrong. Something you're not telling anyone." "I'm fine," Adriana said a bit too quickly. Eric smiled a little bit. "I know you better than to believe that." "Fine. I screwed up." She took a very shaky breath. "And you were right. About everything." "What did you do?" "I can't tell you." "Why not?" "I just can't." Eric turned away in frustration and paced back and forth, focusing on the ground. His eye caught the bright reflection of the sun bouncing off the metal on his prosthetic. His brow furrowed in determination and he turned to her again. "Look, Annie, for what it's worth, I owe you," he said softly. Adriana finally looked at him. "What?" "I pushed you away and I was a complete jerk and I hurt you." And you forgave me for all that even though I gave you so many reasons not to. So yeah. I owe you this. Anything. It doesn't matter what you did, Annie. I'll forgive you because that's what you deserve. Eric paused for a moment before adding, and because you're my best friend. And that's what best friends are supposed to do. Adriana remained silent, but Eric knew the look she was giving him quite well. He was breaking down her defenses. But it didn't look like she was going to offer any information willingly. Is it Brandine? He paused when she flinched slightly at the name. But he knew he had to keep going, otherwise she would probably sit in silence until one of them decided to leave. Is he coming back? Ah, that's a terrible question to ask, I'm sorry. But. I mean, gods, how do I say this? You were with him for a couple of years and a good friend also. I know it hurts right now, and if I made it worse, I'm sorry. It's not you, she interrupted in a timid voice. It had nothing to do with you. Then what is it? Eric asked, his concern for her mounting. Is it because he's not here for today? I know he was here the last couple of... Stop. Adriana suddenly exclaimed, causing her friend to jump in surprise. Just stop talking. Eric shut his mouth with a snap. Something in the pit of his stomach continued to tighten as he watched her turn away a bit more and take several deep breaths. He waited patiently for her to get up the courage to say what it was she clearly needed to say. I'm P. Her breath escaped her and she took a shaky gulp of air. Eric's mind began to race. What could be so horrible that she couldn't even get the words out? He watched her take several more deep breaths before she suddenly let out a tiny sob as the words finally came out. I'm pregnant. Never in Eric's life had he heard such an anguished little wail come from another human being. She sounded like a baby dragon who had fallen out of its nest. It was a terrified cry for help, a tortured voice nearly drowned out by the sounds of the forest around them. I'm sorry, she whispered, now wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. It wasn't supposed to happen this way and I'm so sorry. Annie, hey. Eric waited for her to look at him. Okay, look, this is just going to have to be weird, but there's no watering it down. Did you and Brandine have sex? Adriana jerked at his blunt words. I'm sorry, he sighed. But I have to understand what exactly happened. Did you want it? She down at her hands in her lap. Eric felt a wave of unease, a distinct feeling that he knew the answer to this question. The thought made him sick, but he needed to know for sure. Very slowly, he got on his knees in front of her and held her fidgeting hands. He could feel them shaking. Giving them a reassuring squeeze, he waited for her to meet his eye before he spoke again. Annie, did he rape you? The words felt disgusting, the very last thing he ever wanted to ask someone he loved so much. Adriana closed her eyes. 2 tears streaked down her face before she nodded. Eric felt his insides freeze, his heart pounding in his chest, his head swirling with more thoughts than he could process. But as he watched more tears slide down her cheeks, her whole body shaking with terror, he found himself unable to be angry at her. On the contrary, he felt overwhelmed with sorrow for her and, almost as if it was instinctual, watched himself slip his hands from hers so that he could wrap her in his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder as she allowed him to hold her, gently stroking her hair and allowing her to soak his tunic with her tears. It's okay, he whispered in her ear. You're going to be okay. When they finally broke apart, she wiped her eyes with her arms. Bloodshot as they were still a brilliant shade of green. How far along are you? He asked when he sensed that she was ready to talk again. I don't exactly know, she replied shakily. Okay. What did Mara say? Nothing. I haven't seen her. Eric's mouth dropped open in shock. Annie. What? She'd tell my parents the second her eyes suddenly widened. Oh gods, you can't tell them. His eyebrows lowered in concern. Annie. No. Swear to me, right now. They'll all find out at some point anyway, but don't tell anyone. Please, Eric, she desperately pleaded. All right. Sure. I won't. But, what about your parents? She averted his gaze to stare at his lap. They have to know, Annie. You can't hide it forever. Eric said softly. She continued to shake her head. I have some baggy clothes. He dropped his voice. That baby is going to make him or herself known whether you want them to or not. You literally cannot hide this for 9 months. And then when you give birth, what are you going to do? Hide a baby in your room from your parents, brother and dragons? Hide a crawling infant? A running toddle? Okay. Adriana held up her hands to stop him. So you see my point. I have caused them enough heartache. Trista, Brandine, everything, they don't deserve to deal with another crisis like this. They should banish me this time. You really think they would? Eric asked, helping her wipe tears from her face. They should. He sighed. Do you want them to? She didn't respond except to take a large, shuddering breath. You need some time. I get it. But if you want, I could be there with you. When you tell them. I don't know what to do. Everything's so confusing. I didn't want this, she sniffed again. Eric felt a sudden wave of anger at Brandine. How dare he hurt her? What kind of monster would do something like that? He clenched his jaw and promised himself that if he ever saw that horrible, perverted thing again, he'd skin him alive with his knife. I'm sorry, he heard himself say as he snapped back to reality. It isn't supposed to be this way. She looked at him in confusion and he felt heat rise to his face. I mean, I haven't. His friend cracked a smile at the blush he knew must be shining through his face. I mean, it's not supposed to be a terrible thing. She nodded. I know what you meant. She straightened herself up a bit. Thanks. I feel better. A little bit. Think you can go back to the party? Eric took her hands and helped her up. Will you? Adriana gulped and stared down at their clasped hands. Will you stay with me until it's over? Of course. Eric leaned down and kissed her forehead. But we should get back before people start to worry. Adriana nodded and they turned to walk back to the Great Hall. She held his hand tightly and he knew that she was feeling thankful for the warmth it provided and the assurance it gave her that she had someone who knew her darkest secret but still deeply cared about her. When they got to the back door, she suddenly threw her arms around him and held him close. Thank you, she whispered. Eric felt his insides ignite with a passion that made him feel more conflicted than ever. He dearly wanted to kiss her. The feelings he'd forced down came back up so fast, it felt like they had clobbered him upside the head. And though he reminded his heart that the woman he loved had been victimized in one of the most horrible crimes imaginable, was pregnant as a result, he simply couldn't bring himself to care about that. Not one bit. As far as he was concerned, he had always loved her. And he would always love her. And now, as he held her as tightly as he could without hurting her, he had never been so sure of anything. The party had been exceptionally awkward from that point on. Eric didn't let Adriana out of his sight the whole time, which she had seemed to appreciate. Fortunately, no one thought much of her politely refusing alcohol, which was a bit of a relief. The last thing Eric wanted for her was to have to come up with hasty excuses and look even more suspicious. But he hadn't been given a chance to consider what he had learned. At last, the party had lulled a bit and Adriana could finally come up with an excuse to leave. She and Eric said goodbye to everyone and walked into the mostly empty village square. As they walked, their hands clasped as they had so many times before. It was almost instinct now. They seemed to arrive at the Haddock house far too soon. Eric's thoughts were coming to him at 1,000 miles an hour and his emotions were even more conflicting, not to mention confusing. Adriana stopped in front of her house, staring at her parents' bedroom window. You have to tell them. Eric said in a low voice. They're not going to throw you out. I know they won't. The girl took a deep breath and shook her head. I will, she said through the exhale. Just not now. It's Finn's birthday. Can't take the focus off him. It's your birthday too. Eric took her hands and gently turned her so she was facing him. You'll be okay, Annie. I promise. Adriana's mouth turned upward slightly in a tiny smile but she shook her head. You don't know that. Actually I do. No matter what happens, you always get through it. You are the strongest person I know. Eric took a chance and reached up to tuck her flyaway bangs behind her ear. She didn't recoil. Not strong enough to stop him. Adriana averted her eyes and instead focused on her hands, one of which was still clasped tightly in his. That wasn't your fault. And if anyone doesn't believe you, they're not worth your time. Eric gestured to the village. They forgave me for what I did. And they forgave Finn. This wasn't even something you did wrong. What makes you think they won't still love you? Adriana suddenly wrenched her hand from his. Because what happened brings shame to my family's name. What happened is irreversible. You could repair what you damaged. Her hands made her way to her stomach as she spoke. I can't fix this. No, but you can make it right. Eric's hands longed for hers, but he restrained from reaching out once more. For your baby, at the very least. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Adriana took a deep, slightly shaking breath. She looked like she was going to cry again. Thank you for walking me home. I'm happy to do it. Eric desperately wanted to hug her again, but he held back. Just, don't shut me out. I want to help. I should go. Adriana mumbled. Thanks again, she added before immediately turning and walking quickly to the house. Eric watched her enter her home before turning around and setting off for his own. Cliff was still at the party, so he knew he would be alone for a while. He walked with his eyes focused on the ground and his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched over. His brain couldn't seem to focus on a single thought for more than a few seconds. And now that the party was nearly over, that Adriana was home safe, he had time to think. Time to process what he had learned. Adriana was pregnant. The thought flitted through his mind once more and his heart sank farther in his chest. The one girl he never would have expected to end up in this situation was now facing it, and he had no idea what to do. He wasn't the baby's father. Brandine was long gone. He was nothing except someone on the outside looking in. Someone who, like many men before him, had fallen in love with the wrong woman. But he wasn't ready to let her go. Should he though? She had been irreversibly damaged. No, he couldn't leave her. She certainly hadn't left him when he lost his foot. Is that the best reason to still be her friend? A voice inside his head questioned. Was it? No. She was his best friend. Was your best friend? The condescending voice corrected. Eric's head lowered at the thought. She turned her back on you for that lying rat-eating mange bucket. She was completely willing to throw away your friendship just to appease him. That was ridiculous, and Eric knew it the moment the thought popped into his head. If Brandine had raped her, of course she was terrified to make him angry. He couldn't blame her for that. He wasn't sure he would have done anything different if the roles were reversed. Even so, you should leave her alone. You said she was the strongest person you know. Not strong enough to stop him. The image of Adriana turning away from him as she spoke flashed in his mind. Her dazzling green eyes didn't sparkle like they used to, but instead were hopeless and insecure. She seemed frightened. She had been there for him when he lost his foot. She had willingly let him cry on her, bleed on her, even after he'd treated her horribly up until then. How could he have gotten through that day without her? No. He had to be there for her now. Especially if she was going to have that baby. The baby. Eric wobbled on his front step, allowing the realization to sink in. Annie was going to have a baby. He pushed the door open and walked inside. There was no question about it. He thought as he slumped against the door. An image popped into his head, Annie looking down at her distended stomach with one hand gracefully rubbing it. Then ever so slowly, she looked up and caught his gaze. Her eyes were so glossy and red, the color drained from her cheeks except for the evident tear stains. The sight of her tore at his heart. He turned to his room and sauntered over. With each step he saw her being mistreated by the village. Ignored, mocked, spit upon. He saw her alone with an infant in the back corner of the great hall, watching everyone else dance and sing in a celebration, yet she was outcast from society. But doesn't she deserve it? The voice whispered in his ear as Eric opened the door to his room. His head shot up at the question. For the first time in his life, his head and his heart reached a different conclusion. Adriana had walked right into it. He'd known what Brandine was and he'd certainly tried to tell her. She hadn't listened. Was this her punishment for refusing to see how dangerous he was? Eric's logical side agreed with this notion. She'd been stupid and maybe this would teach her a painful but valuable lesson. Yet his heart grieved for her. All the childhood memories of playing with her, picking flowers, sitting by the seaside cliff, her radiant smile and sparkling green eyes full of life and laughter could not be disregarded for one mistake. He suddenly hated himself as he realized he was weighing his dearest friend's good and bad actions on a mental scale that would determine the penalties he would issue to her. A sudden spurt of rage shot through him, causing him to turn and slam his bedroom door. He glared at the wood with disdain as if it had offended him in some way. His mind raced with all the consequences that this, the baby, would impose on her. However, what troubled him the most, was not knowing what to do for, with, or about her. Why? He felt the strain in the back of his throat as he yelled, simultaneously slamming his fists on the door. Try as he might, he could not stop cool tears from spilling down his front. For some reason, a memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in a very long time. He leaned against the door, allowing it to fill his mind. He had been bored and achy at Mara's and Annie had come to see him. Here Annie picked up a bowl and spoon on the nightstand. Almost meticulously, she scooped the spoon in the soup and brought it to his lips. I'm sorry if it doesn't taste so good. I'm not exactly thin but I figured you needed something to eat. She explained tentatively as he swallowed. Eric breathed a laugh. I lost my foot, not my hands. Oh humor me. Annie winked at him. I've got to practice. Ava's going to be old enough to spoon feed pretty soon and I want to perfect the technique. If you insist. He obediently opened his mouth and let her place the spoonful of soup inside. It's not bad. What is it? I don't really know, it's got carrots, onions, cabbage, chicken, yak broth and some seasonings. Annie elucidated. But what do you call it? You always made a name for everything. She stared at the bowl of soup. I don't know. How about friendship soup? I like it. Eric smiled. Kind of got a sweet and sour mix. Like our friendship these past couple years. Annie looked calm and relieved as she sat at his bedside, and fed him with a genuine smile. Yet, Eric noticed, the depth in her green eyes and sagging skin below them showed worry and exhaustion. She had lost sleep, because of him. She guided the spoon into his mouth. Somehow, a little of the broth spilled down his chin. Oh, I'm sorry. She placed the utensil in the bowl and picked up a napkin. Delicately, she wiped his chin. Their eyes caught, green interacting with teal. They stared at each other until Annie cleared her throat and leaned back, recoiling and diverting her gaze away from him. Why? The question died in his throat when her attention swiftly returned and focused on him. Suddenly he felt like such an idiot for his quandary, but his curiosity got the better of him. Why are you doing this? She stared at him, completely silent. I've hurt you, he continued. I betrayed you. I hardly ever spoke to you even when we were living in the same house. Why were you there when all that happened? Why are you taking care of me now? Because I never stopped caring. Annie replied with a small frown. I really tried. I tried to pretend you never meant anything to me and that I would be fine if I just forgot about you. But I couldn't. I guess it's kind of an instinct when you've cared about someone for so long. Well, that's not going to happen again. Eric said, putting his hand on top of hers. This time around, I'm not letting something stupid like that get in the way. Annie smiled and held up her spoon. My first act as your reinstated best friend is to make sure you eat all this soup. And my first act is to take this bowl and eat it myself so that your hands are free. Eric carefully took the bowl from her hands, rather surprised that she didn't protest. I see you're letting me win already. You just wait until the next time we're at the library. You will never win at being quiet. Adriana grinned and Eric stuck his tongue out at her. He had missed this. The banter. The pretty green eyes. The presence of the best friend he'd ever had. This time, he was never going back. Eric felt disgusted with himself when he came back to reality. The answer to his question of whether to stay with her had been with him this whole time. He was foolish to think he could ever live with himself if he ever betrayed her like that again. He felt horrible for ever considering it. He wiped his face and sniffed. He couldn't understand. Annie, who had done nothing but bend over backwards for others without thinking about herself, she never deserved this. She shouldn't have to deal with it. Brandine shouldn't have taken advantage of her like that. The thought made his eyes sting with tears again. Annie, you're so stupid, he whimpered. You care about people too much. Why didn't you ever ask for help? We all would have helped you. He was quiet as his hand rested against the door. The physical pain stinging his raw, red hands meant nothing to him. However, his soul ached. And look what's happened now, he continued, trying to stem the flow of tears now dripping down onto his tunic. You got yourself hurt. With a thud, his head rested against the wooden door. Time slowed as he poured out his heart. Thoughts would come and go as fast as the wind. Everything was a blur. Yet in every instance, he kept thinking about Annie, and it only made him more emotional. I'm sorry, Annie, he whispered after a long stretch of silence. I'm so sorry. Chapter 12, Growing Problems. Chapter text. Like many times in his young adult life, Adriana was the first and last thing on Eric's mind. He thought about her when he woke up and before he fell asleep. He thought about her frequently throughout the day, being his best friend and ultimate crush for so long. He simply couldn't help wondering how she was or what she was doing, though most mornings he figured she was still asleep, blonde hair a tangled mess upon her pillow. But today was different. His best friend and her current predicament remained at the forefront of his mind most of the night. Sleep evaded him as the situation rolled through his mind again and again. He was great at solving problems, but no simple solutions came. The situation was dire and there seemed to be no upside to the situation. His childhood best friend, the girl he'd come to care about deeper than he'd ever intended, was pregnant. And that wasn't even the worst part. No, the worst part was that it didn't come out of a stupid mistake or a moment of weakness that was, nonetheless, consensual. That was what had haunted him as he tossed and turned in bed. The fact that, while he was out doing God's knew what, his precious Annie was being raped by that sick monster. The idea tore at his heart. He desperately wanted to go back, to stop it from happening, to make it so Adriana never had to suffer like that. Ever since he knew the meaning of the word, Eric could never imagine what would possess a man to take advantage of a woman like that. He would never even think about it, no matter how much he might want the intimacy. Rape truly was one of the most foul, despicable things any human being could do to another. When he did sleep, it was restless. He tossed and turned, fluffed his pillow and flipped it over, hoping the cooler side would make him fall asleep again. By the time pre-dawn light began to filter through the curtains, he was done lying around. Eric threw off his covers, attached his prosthetic and changed into warm pants and a sweater. He threw a lighter pair of clothes into his satchel lying next to the door, checking to make sure he had everything he needed for the day. The sound of Cliff mumbling in his sleep from across the hall caused him to smile a little. Not even sleep could make the guy stop talking. The crisp early morning air sent goosebumps up his arms, but he hardly noticed. A few early risers nodded to him in greeting, he gave them civil nods, but didn't slow his pace. He didn't feel like being social so early in the morning. Not with his head so full of Adriana and... Eric gulped. And her baby. The situation crashed over him once again. He sighed, marching through the forest line with his eyes on the ground. While the village was quiet, it wouldn't be for much longer. He wanted peace and quiet without interruption until he had to go to work. Finally, he settled down on a log and got his sketchbook out his satchel. He wasn't as good at drawing as Hiccup, but he certainly wasn't too bad. He stared at a terrible terror, which wasn't paying the slightest bit of attention to him and was sniffing the ground, occasionally digging with its claws as if to find a tasty morsel there. Soon, the blank page of his sketchbook was filled with the crude likeness of the terror, and Eric felt a tiny bit better. Keeping his mind off of Adriana, even for a little while, eased his mind a bit. By the time he was done, the sun was rising above the tree line. He knew he would have to get to work. Horst bid him a hearty good morning when Eric silently walked into the workroom and got his work tools out. He knew that any second, Cliff would burst in, apologize for being late, and immediately start chattering about whatever he was thinking about. Ordinarily Eric would be happy to listen, happy to throw in his 2 cents. Not today. Hey bruh. Cliff burst through the door and threw his tools on the table, allowing them to scatter in all directions. You won't believe what happened on the way here. Eric blew his bangs off his forehead, already elbow-deep in saddle work. I'm sure it's something of great importance. If Cliff noticed his sarcasm, he didn't comment. Of course. Every story is compelling and irrevocably important. Boys. Yes. Cliff spun around to face Horst with a massive grin on his face, hands behind his back. He even bounced on his heels in anticipation for their boss comment. Eric rolled his eyes at his friend's ridiculousness. I'll be making a delivery to the fishery, Horst said. Stay busy, I'll be back in less than an hour. Think you can? Hold down the fort, sure thing boss. Cliff saluted. Horst raised a critical eyebrow. You know you must actually accomplish things, right Cliff? Not just tell delusional stories of grandeur. Cliff's mouth fell open and Eric had to laugh. His friend's lower lip trembled dangerously. What are you saying, boss? Horst rolled his eyes, pushing off the door jamb and exiting the room. Just get some work done, okay? I'll be back soon. As soon as the front door closed, Cliff whirled around, hands akimbo. Well, I have never been more insulted in my life. Eric sighed. Cliff. Good thing I have you to tell my story to. Eric rubbed his eyes with his palms and yawned widely. No offense, but can we just be quiet today? Cliff stared at Eric for several seconds, affronted. He looked like he might argue further, but he paused, probably taking in Eric's posture and expression. Finally he lowered himself onto his chair and scooted it forward so he was inches from his friend. So what's wrong? He asked in a voice that was rather abruptly concerned. I can't tell you. Eric turned toward his work and picked up a tool, fully intending to finish this saddle and hopefully tune out his rather forceful co-worker. Yeah, you can. Cliff leaned forward against his open palm. I'm a vault of secrets. I didn't spend the last 2 years working with you just to endure small talk at the expense of my sanity and my good looks. He tossed his curly hair in mock vanity. How would working with, no. Look, Cliff, this is something you can't really. Eric Noah Larson, if there's one thing I know about you. It's my middle name. No. Well yes, but no. Not what I meant. Cliff cut back in, looking annoyed at the interruption. I was going to say that I happen to know that you don't keep secrets from me. You're my bra, and when something is bugging you as much as this is, I shall not rest until I can conquer your sadness, because that is what brothers. It isn't my secret, Cliff. Eric interrupted irritably. So it's not mine to share. Cliff was silent for a beat before he spoke again. When it bothers you this much, it's something you've got to get out of your system. Eric opened his mouth to argue, but Cliff swiftly cut him off. No, look, I'm not being nosy or snooping, but you look like someone died, like you did when we first met, and I don't like that look on you. Last time you had it, you. The boy's eyes flitted to Eric's wrists. I hate that look. Eric paused in his work, his eyes resting on his arms. They still bore the scars of his self-harm. He had told Cliff about it recently, and the boy had been horrified to know that he'd ever gotten that depressed. But Cliff was his roommate, his best friend. Eric knew that he wouldn't rest until he got the secret out of him. He knew he wouldn't tell anyone. Still, he felt like he was betraying his other best friend when he finally turned to face Cliff. You can't tell anyone. Eric mumbled, staring Cliff straight in the eye. Not Taryn, not your parents, not Horst, no one. I promise, Cliff said solemnly. I mean it, no one can know about it. Eric glanced over his shoulder as if the walls had ears. This is big, and if it gets out. My lips are sealed, Eric. Okay. Eric eyed the door before speaking in a voice so low, Cliff had to lean forward to hear it. Brandine was a lot worse than we thought. Worse how? He hated saying the words. It would make them even more real. He was hurting Annie. A lot. I don't really know how much, but he. Eric was embarrassed to feel tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them down and the urge to cry passed almost as quickly as it came. Brandine raped her, Cliff. The color drained from Cliff's face. All of the laughter and excitement was replaced with abject horror. He raped her. Our Anna. He pushed a hand deeper into his curls. Gods. Oh, that's not the end of it. Eric waited for Cliff to look up at him before he continued, his voice even quieter than before. She's pregnant. What? Cliff yelped, making Eric wince and glance at the door to make sure Horst wasn't about to burst through, even though he was still gone. Sorry, but like, with a baby. What else could I possibly have meant? Eric sighed deeply. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, and I'm the only one who knows. Or I was until about 10 seconds ago. How could he hurt her like that? Cliff exhaled shakily. This is the kind of thing that happens to girls far away, not here. Not to Anna. I know. Eric stared down at his hands, not able to look his friend in the eye anymore. To see the anguish he'd felt these last few hours on yet another face was too much to bear. I can't really believe it myself. I mean, I knew Brandine was bad news, but I always thought it was because I was jealous. I thought all my feelings were misplaced because Hiccup is a sharp guy. Surely he'd see through any treacherous behavior. I thought I was overreacting. But I'd never think he would. Gods, I don't know, Cliff. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I remember when my sister was pregnant, but she had her husband and I was just sort of there. Okay. Cliff took a deep breath. We've got to make sure she knows we're on her side. She knows I am. Yeah, I'll talk to her then. Eric stiffened. Cliff. Bruh, it will be fine. I'll tell her that I forced it out of you exactly how it was. It's not like you came running to me. For once, Cliff had a no-nonsense expression on his face. I'll take care of it. I just want her to know she can trust me. The blonde gradually felt a stiffness ease out of his shoulders. Having a friend to confide in might be just what he needed all along. I should have talked to you right away. Nah, it's okay, Cliff sighed distractedly. There's a time for everything. How long have you known? She told me yesterday. How long has she known? Eric winced. Not very long. Great. Cliff sighed. Well, she doesn't seem to be showing yet. Well, not that I'd be looking anyway. How far along is she? Honestly, I don't know. She didn't say, if she even knows. Eric picked up his sewing again. But if she ends up like Mags did, she could be like, skinny one day and huge the next. Cliff's eyes widened. That's a thing. Apparently. Eric mused. Huh. Women. Eric snickered. Yup. Cliff reached up and slapped his shoulder. Don't worry. Things will work out. Eric frowned, his heartstrings pulling once again. What? Is it wrong of me to say that I hoped that after things blew over with Brandine that maybe I could get a shot at dating her? Cliff's face morphed into one of barely controlled glee. Oh my gods, that's so cute. Eric rolled his eyes, except it can't happen now. Cliff's exuberance disappeared as quickly as it had come. Why not? Eric cocked his head. She's pregnant, Cliff. So? I think she's going to have a lot more on her plate, figuring out more important things than dating. Like how she's going to tell her family, for instance. Cliff held up his hands in a T sign. Hold up. She hasn't told them yet. Don't you think half of the archipelago would be burned to the ground by now if Hiccup knew? Good point. Cliff chewed his lip pensively. So, when's? I don't know. She said she'd tell them soon. Eric sighed. She's going to have to, whether she wants to or not. Yeah. Well, like I said, don't worry yourself sick. Things will work out. Honestly. Cliff jumped out of his seat, nearly toppling half of Eric's work tools. But enough moping. Can I tell you my story now? Eric breathed a small laugh. All right, I guess you deserve that much. Or thanks bruh, you're a gem. Eric made a confused face at the saddle as Cliff launched into his story. But he couldn't help but notice that the sparkle in Cliff's steel-grey eyes had dulled slightly. Though he was clearly trying to cheer up his bra by changing the subject, what Eric had told him and the weight it held hadn't left him, nor was it pushed down. Eric wondered if Cliff, goofy, cheerful Cliff, had lost a bit of his innocence and optimism. And for that, he had yet another, albeit more minor, reason to want to kill Brandine with his bare hands.